Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the regular council meeting of Thursday, August 20th. With electronic public participation, we'll call the meeting to order. I'll ask if you'll stand and join us in the singing of O Canada. So I'm going to ask you to join me for a moment of silent reflection, but before we do, Councillor Richardson wanted to say a few words. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you. At this time, I would like to keep our thoughts and prayers and condolences to the young Jane family in Jannetville who suffered a tragic loss last week of losing their 3-year-old son, Walker. So at this time, I'd like to send our condolences and honor this time to reflect. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 2.3 is the adoption of the open session agenda. Councillor Richardson, I believe you have that as amended.
I do, and through you, agenda number 2.3, adoption of the open session agenda, moved by myself, Councillor Richardson, seconded by Councillor Vale, that the agenda for the open session of the regular council meeting on Thursday, August 20th, 2020 be adopted as circulated and with the following amendments. Additions. Item 6.2, deputation by Beverly Saunders, Echo View Consulting Services, Inc., regarding proposed rezoning to permit the staging of commercial outdoor role-playing games at 36 Walker Road, Verlam, item 9.1 on the agenda. Item 6.3, deputation by Larry Jenkin, regarding proposed zoning to permit the staging of commercial outdoor role-playing games at 36 Walker Road, Verlam, item 9.1 on the agenda. Item 6.4, deputation by Heather Stovall regarding the use of off-road vehicles on boundary roads, item 10.1.4 on the agenda. Item 8.11, memorandum from Ian Walker, Planning Officer, Large Developments, regarding item 8.3.2 on the agenda for August 20th, 2020, regular council meeting.
Thank you. Call the question. All in favor? That's passed. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest on anything on today's agenda? Seeing none. Notices and information by members of council and staff. Council, anybody want to make any announcements? Councillor O'Reilly, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At the Lindsay X, they're going to have the first Lindsay virtual fair. It's going to kick off Monday. It kicked off Monday this week. It's going to feature online farm tours at And later you can order your Swiss fudge, caramel corn, and cotton candy, and you'll be able to pick it up at September 21st. And there'll also be scavenger hunt and other things, so you can look on the website to see what else is going to happen at the fair, at the fairgrounds. And then later, starting on August 21st, the Old Gold Museum is going to have a drive-through display from the First World War, and that'll be from August 21st to September 7th, from 10 in the morning till 7 at night, and it'll be $40 per vehicle. So 3 or 4 people can come in, and it's already on. I just looked at it; it's already on there today. And at 1 o'clock today, maybe you're going to mention, Mr. Mayor, that our local member of Parliament, Laurie Scott, and the Minister of Agriculture, Ernie Hardeman, are making an announcement at 1 o'clock today around funding for the fairs for this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Ashmore?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have 2 announcements. The first one is the Community Pandemic Recovery Task Force is looking for input from local agencies and organizations on how they have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. A link to a survey has been sent directly to organizations from across Kawartha Lakes, and the deadline for submission is Friday, August 21st at 4:30, tomorrow afternoon. For organizations or agencies that did not receive the survey invitation, they can contact Brenda Stonehouse or Rod Sutherland at the city. The information received through the survey will help the task force identify gaps that need to be addressed. Thank you to everyone who has already completed the survey, and the survey is found at www.jumpinkawarthalakes.ca. And my second final announcement is on September 12th, there will be citizens coming from Kawartha Lakes to Parliament Hill in Ottawa. The CCFR, Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights, will be having a socially distanced rally at 1 p.m. that day. The purpose of the assembly will be to voice opposition to the federal government's order and council mass gun ban and confiscation of legally acquired personal property during a global pandemic and suspended Parliament. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Seymour Fagan, go ahead.
Yes, today in Bobcaygeon we have something exciting happening. We have a couple of boats going from one end of the locks to the other, starting at Case Manor and ending up at the beach park with the band The Spoons. And what this is for is we're looking at raising funds to get music therapists in long-term care homes. And it's starting in Bobcaygeon because it was the hardest hit at the very beginning. And this project is in conjunction with the Awesome Music Project out of Toronto. And this will be the first heading nationwide. Yeah, so it's pretty exciting, and people can watch from the shores, socially distant.
And I hear you were a big part of pulling that together, so thank you. Any other announcements? I have one. Very happy to announce the Fenland Falls and District Chamber of Commerce, the Bobcaygeon Area Chamber of Commerce, the Coboconk-Norland and Area Chamber of Commerce, the Lindsay and District Chamber of Commerce, and the Lindsay Downtown BIA have joined the Ontario Chamber of Commerce and Boards of Trade and Chambers of Commerce across the country in support of Canada United, a national movement to support local business across the country. As part of the movement, RBC has brought together more than 50 of Canada's leading brand business associations and chamber networks to rally Canadians to show local some love by buying, dining, and shopping local to help kickstart the Canadian economy. Videos can be seen at gocanadaunited.ca. For each view, up to 5 cents, up to a maximum contribution amount of $2 million from July 20th will be contributed by the Royal Bank of Canada. The Chambers of Commerce asks the City of Kawartha Lakes to recognize August 28th to the 30th, 2020 as the Canada United Weekend in Kawartha Lakes. Get out there and buy, dine, shop, celebrate, and support our local businesses as part of this nationwide movement. Thank you. Anyone on staff have anything they want to announce? CAO, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and just briefly, I just wanted to draw Council's attention to your folders. We've distributed the city's strategic plan. You'll recall back in January, you approved the document, and feels like January was a lifetime ago, but we wanted to publish and still get ahead of this blueprint, highlighting what our priorities are. We were able to temper it with a message that recognized the pandemic and the circumstances that we were in. And although we did have to reprioritize, and we're still continuing to do that in the shorter term, over the life of this plan, we want to continue to get back to what were your council priorities for this term of council. So we're distributing this broad-based. It's online as well. Just wanted to bring it to your attention. Thanks.
Thank you. Item 5 is the council minutes. Can I get a motion that the minutes of the July 28th, 2020 regular council meeting be received and adopted, please? Councillor Elmsley and Dunn. Any questions? All in favor? That's passed. We'll move right into deputations. Item 6, our first deputation is regarding the Victoria County Historical Society lease agreement for the Old Jail Museum. It is related to item 10.1.1 on the agenda, which has been extracted. We have Jane Gregory Gill and Barbara Doyle joining us.
Good afternoon, Mayor Lapham.
Good afternoon. We can hear you, so go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'm pleased to be here with Barbara to represent the Historical Society and want to thank you for inviting us today. First, I want to thank Barbara, Zach Miller, and Sarah Walker-Howe for the fabulous work they've done over the last 6 months to keep us alive and ticking. It's been very professional. We've done a lot of advancing exhibits, and the society itself is pleased, but it's really a pat on the back to them, especially during these times. Now, I want to thank the staff and the management at the city. Without them, their advice and their support and their encouragement, none of us would have been able to do any of this. So right now we're at a point where we're looking at the lease. We're very pleased with the lease. The process itself has been great. It's been really positive. And we just want to thank all of you, Craig and Jorg and Ron and all of the others that helped us through this. And we're very supportive of it. We are excited to have a permanent home to work in and to look forward to our development through the coming years. As you know, COVID-19 has kind of messed us up a little bit. And yet, when you think about it, it offers us many opportunities. Now, the board is here in need of a solid base to operate from. Our volunteer supply has disappeared completely. And we want to meet the museum standards of Ontario. We want to grow into a professional digital enterprise linked with a community so that we're helping that community, not just a museum focused on things, but rather stories and history in the making today. With that in mind, I want to turn over to Barbara. She's going to talk to you about how COVID has impacted us and what we see as the next steps to enable us to get on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. We appreciate you allowing us to participate today in a socially distant, safe way for the two of us together. Thanks, Jane. As you know, operating a museum of this size with the strictly volunteer staff is very challenging. With COVID-19, we've really had a hard time. Many of our volunteers are senior and have opted to stay home, of course, as they should with referring to health guidelines and provincial legislation. But it's going to be a long time before our major volunteer base comes back. We've heard this from everyone we've been talking to. We have a very small core of volunteers that come in every day. Myself, Sarah Walker-Howe and Zach Miller are here virtually every day. And we work as volunteers. But this isn't a sustainable model. And we've determined in our COVID response what we need to do to reopen to the public safely is we need a full-time manager and a full-time collection manager with 3 paid base staff to manage front of house and work as cleaning staff and docents for the people that will be coming through to visit our museum. The consistency of a paid staff is integral to COVID response, but also for the growth of this organization. So we are looking to continue the work that we do in this community. And I just wanted to share with you, we had sent around to all the council a little report featuring everything we've kind of done in the last year. It's a lot more than 5 minutes we'll handle. But I also want to tell you of 2 other initiatives, and thank you to Councillor Riley for telling about the First World War immersive experience. We partnered with the LEX. We believe community partners are really key to continuing our success in this community. And we've created a fundraising event, a huge, massive 500 linear feet of museum exhibit for people to be able to drive through, COVID safe, socially distance safe, that will be guided by audio docent on iPads that will be cleaned. And we've also acquired funding for a beautiful new impressive Canadian language museum exhibit called Beyond Words, which is a trilingual experience of interaction language experience that will be available for a full year to help support our school support and also education for the community. So we are, in addition to requesting that our lease be adopted, as has been supported by city staff, Craig Shanks, I believe he sent in a report, we are asking to be referred back to city staff in response to a request to seek COVID relief funding for 5 paid staff positions for the foreseeable future, and to work with city staff to be created a line item in the 2021 budget. And we appreciate your consideration for that. It's really, really important to have paid staff in a building of this size. We've really grown since being a small country museum. This is a municipal museum now. Although we are not under city committee, there's a lot of really valid reasons why we stay autonomous. It gives us great opportunities for funding that's not available otherwise, and allows us to do the work that serves the community. So I'd like to ask if any of the councillors have any questions about the information report that we sent, or if they have any questions about our request.
Sounds good, thank you. What I'll do is I'll get a motion for now to receive your deputation and the correspondence. We do have the package in our folders that you were referring to. I'll get a motion from Councillor Dunn to receive. Can I get a seconder, please? Councillor O'Reilly, and then we'll see if there's any questions, and then if there's a follow-up motion, we can go from there. Councillor Dunn, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for this opportunity. Have you had a chance to connect with the Kawartha Lakes COVID Relief Task Force? I know it's not what you're asking for in particular, but we are trying to find agencies that require relief from the impact of COVID so that we can start to plan around that. Have you been able to reach out and get in contact with them?
Yes, I had a lengthy discussion with Rebecca Mustard, both for the city perspective, but also as chair of the COVID relief. We have been in ongoing discussions, and we've been seeking as much funding relief as we can possibly find. We have been successful throughout this period. We did apply for the federal CEBA $40,000 loan, of which $10,000 we'll be able to keep once we repay $30,000. We received a museum assistant program grant in the amount of $15,000 that was project specific to the Beyond Words exhibit. We've received private donations as well, but almost everything we're receiving is for projects that are very specific and not for operating funds. CMOG, the Community Museum Operating Grant, is one that we would normally apply to, but it's still closed since 2016 to new applications. So we are struggling to find standard, sustainable operation funding. Is just not there. And with door admissions being, we're still closed right now, and with door admissions being challenging, it's really hard to get mainline operating funding. But we are looking at all the different relief funding. We know that the city just supported a contribution grant for digital projects, so we're looking at that. But it's very piecemeal, and we really need something that will kind of continue for a period of time to get us to that next level and get higher federal and Ontario provincial funding.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm grant writing constantly.
I realize that, and I thought I'd sort of address that with my opening remarks. The city has got 2 task forces currently going, one for economic relief and one for relief of organizations that have been impacted by COVID. And you're right, it is specifically related to that. And there is funding available. So without prejudging what the task force is going to come up with, it may very well address things like the cleaning that's a result, like the extra cleaning that has to be done. I mean, we're trying to set parameters, but there is a survey on the city website, and if you look that up and possibly fill out that survey, then once we gather all the information, we may be able to address a small portion of what you're asking for. And I recognize you have a big ask of 5 full-time positions, and that's just a totally different envelope, but this might get you a part-time FTE for a short period of time while you get prepared to open up. It's just another small envelope of funding that may be available, but we are trying to identify the agencies that are in need of the funding, because that's one of our key roles, is to identify agencies that actually need funding, because some agencies out there are fully supported by the government, federal or provincial, and they're doing fine, and they said, thank you very much for reaching out to us, but we're okay. So organizations like yours that may need the funding, we need to identify you and have you fill out that survey. So if you could do that at your earliest convenience, that would be great.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Ashmore, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, to either Jane or Barbara. Just a couple questions. Thanks for the report here. Do you have an operating budget for 2020, 2021, or at least like a 5-year plan or a business plan for the near future put together yet, or are you in the process of putting that together?
We do have an approved 2020 budget. It's an austerity budget with no paid staff. I can send that through to all council if you'd like, or also work with city staff to bring this back for the next council meeting with a report generated with them. We were in the middle of doing our official strategic plan and into our next round of community participation and review when COVID shut us down. So we're struggling to do that from a distance, as we really want community input. We do have a rolling 3 to 5 year curatorial and exhibition plan, as well as a collection management plan. We've recently upgraded the systems through a CHESS grant funding for 2020 with 10 new computer systems, new software, but it's very difficult when we're all volunteer based. At any time, if we leave, the building would be shut down. Like that's just we need stability of standardized staff and management. That's just our reality. We've grown actually too big in a sense for our current model, and we're just really ready for that next push. And looking at what we're asking for as well, we look to the cultural master plan. I mean, we live with that on our desks, and we refer to it pretty much daily of how to meet the city's requirements and vision for the next 10 years. And we have probably completed about 75% of what's needed, but there's no real framework yet for city funding, what that's going to look like. And we would like to be, worked into that potential of an ongoing operation fund.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thanks. And last question is, have you ever looked at corporate sponsorships? To give you an example, the ROM, the Royal Ontario Museum, I know it's on a much bigger scale, but they've partnered with many corporations and individuals. Have you looked at corporate sponsorships to help with the funding of the museum?
Yes, actually, in July, we received a $25,000 sponsorship for a combination of the McLean Foundation and 2 of the Flavel family descendants for a large exhibit that will be taking place for the next year on our main floor called The Giants of Lindsay, about the Flavel family. Some of that money will be used towards new archival cases to help with our CMOG readiness in our presentation, and the cases will be able to be used for years and years afterwards. Without grants like that, we wouldn't be able to purchase the materials needed to present at the next level of legislated museum and community standard needs. We also just were notified of a smaller grant from the McCrae Model Foundation, and it is in regard to their collection with us as well. So a lot of the things we're finding are coming very specifically for projects or specific collection response. Operations are, I think, challenging because most businesses expect that we are already paying our staff and that we are running, professionally standard museum. And right now we're just still doing that all on a volunteer basis.
Thank you. Councillor Riley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Barb and to Jane for your excellent display at the fairgrounds. I had an opportunity to see it today and just before the meeting, and it's a great display. And further to Councillor Dunn's proposal, I believe you're quite aware of the Trillium envelope out there now. It's around $83 million, and I believe a lot of it is going towards things like maybe strategic plans and as such. So there may also be a window there for you to tap into as well.
We will be applying to the Resilient Communities Fund through Trillium, absolutely.
There's a call on Monday.
And we did apply for the phase 2 MAP Museum System Program COVID Relief Fund. Our operating budget allowed for a $10,000 volume, and my understanding is that we were fully approved for that. So that is some relief, but it's basically covering what we've lost in door admissions this summer.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for the deputants? We have a motion to receive the deputation and the correspondence that was in our package. Seeing none, we have that motion. Seeing no more questions, can I get all in favor? That's passed. Thank you. Does anybody want to put forward a follow-up motion regarding the funding request this time? Nothing at this time? Okay. Thank you, ladies, for joining us. We appreciate it. And we'll take your request under consideration and we'll see what we can do. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Item 6.2 is the proposed rezoning to permit the staging of commercial outdoor role-playing games at 36 Walkers Road, Verulam. Related to item 9.1 on the agenda, Beverly Saunders from EcoView Consulting is joining us. Hi, Beverly. Can you hear me?
Hi, I can. Can you hear me?
We can hear you okay. So just a friendly reminder, you have 5 minutes, so go ahead.
All right, let me start my timer. Okay, my name's Beverly Saunders. I work for EcoView Consulting. I represent William Ashby and Al McGale. They are the landowners for this site. They also host the live action role-playing facility currently on the site, which has been ongoing at 36 Walkers Road for a number of years under a temporary bylaw. We are currently have a zoning bylaw in front of you that would establish that use as a permanent use. And the bylaw actually has language associated with constraints for the permanent use as well as for continued use, which we have requested so that our client can continue hosting events while he goes through the technical work for a site plan agreement. There's quite a few studies that need to be done and detailed design, and so we'd like to continue to host events while he can undertake that work. We took over the file in August 2019 and have since worked with City of Kawartha Lakes to address agricultural impacts, traffic impacts associated with a year-round use, essentially an additional 6 events from the original proposal. Servicing for the continued use that we've proposed, as well as the full build out of the site. Ontario Building Code compliance for the structures on the site, and environmental impacts for the full build out and continued use. I'm specifically here to give a delegation, one, to thank staff for all the work that they've done with us to draft this bylaw. I think you are in receipt of a new bylaw that has been drafted and circulated to you today that has a slight adjustment from the original one. That bylaw speaks specifically to a timeline placed on the proposed continued use. The language actually states 3 years. So essentially after 3 years, the use could not continue in the absence of a site plan agreement. We are here to give this deputation at the request of our client. Our client would like to continue the use, as in continue to host events as long as they possibly can in advance of a site plan agreement being required. They believe they've demonstrated they can continue this use and continue to do what they have been doing on the site, and that be adequately controlled in the absence of a site plan agreement. And so they would like that to be considered by staff. If the timeline for the continued use is required by council, they would request that more than 3 years be provided, for example, up to 6 years. The reason for this request is financial in nature. So the zoning bylaw amendment for this process cost significant amounts of money, more than the client had expected. Sorry, my cats are fighting over there. and they would like a little more time to come back or to recoup the money that they have spent over the past year, particularly due to COVID. There's been no income on this site due to COVID. And they would like the chance to save up the money to do the technical studies for the site plan agreement. And so specifically our delegation is to request consideration of that 3-year timeline, potentially a longer timeline, or removing the temporary or the timeline entirely. Specifically, I did also want to touch on a couple issues that have come up from the public since the public meeting last year. So there was a question about the changes that have happened since the public meeting. Those changes include some additional structures that have been proposed. Specifically, we're proposing 600 square meters total of structures as opposed to 300, which was originally stated. We'd like to just note that that additional structures just represents the temporary structures that are on the site. We wanted to make sure that those were included in the cap of structures. And it represents a 0.13% coverage for the site. So typically a rural site has a 10% coverage requirement. So we are requesting a 0.13% coverage. So we believe that this to be a minor change from what originally was proposed. There was also a question about a year-long use. So why is a year-long use being proposed as opposed to the temporary seasonal use that was originally proposed? So just so everyone's aware, there's still weekend events during the summer and fall and spring season. During the winter, there's a request that they have a single day event once a month. We have provided supporting studies for that, including traffic, environmental updates, and servicing updates for that additional amount. All found the impacts of this to be negligible, and so we also believe this to be a minor addition. And then specifically, we spoke to the continued use, which I spoke to already. So I'll leave it at that. If anyone has any questions, please let me know, and I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Beverly. We'll get a motion to receive the deputation. Councillor Elmsley and Vale. Questions? Councillor Elmsley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, thank you for your presentation. Just a couple of things. Has there been any reaction from the neighbors to this site in terms of concerns over the amount of activity that has taken place?
So we have not received any complaints regarding the site as a part of this rezoning application from the neighbors. So we have had one individual from the public provide comments. I think he's speaking today, but otherwise we have not. And I would just like to point out that in our draft bylaw, we've increased the setback requirements from a typical rural site to ensure that there's additional setbacks between the neighboring uses and this use. But no, we haven't received any complaints.
Thank you. One other question. How much parking is available on site, or is parking only going to be available on the roadways, such as Walker Line and I believe Cedar Tree Road?
So there's an existing parking lot on the site that was established under the temporary bylaw. So in the bylaw here, it specifically permits that parking lot to continue. It's my understanding that there's enough parking for all the event attendees on that existing parking lot, which would be gravel.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Seymour Fagan?
Yes, thank you, through you. Thank you, Beverly, for the report. Actually, I attended the location with some of our planners and Mayor Letham last fall, so we saw exactly what was going on there, and I didn't have any concerns at that point when we saw exactly what they've done, including the parking. So they're looking for 6 years. Would that be enough for them if there was the extension instead of having to have the site plan in 3 years?
That would certainly be preferable, yes. So for context, the zoning bylaw amendment process cost approximately $50,000. That was unexpected through this process. So they have to recoup those costs. Typically, their event makes about $10,000 to $15,000 in profit in a year. So they have to recoup that cost and then save the cost for a site plan, which is an additional $30,000 to $60,000, depending on what's included in the site plan agreement and the technical costs. So that gives certainly more time for them to figure that out. And so, yes, 6 years would definitely be preferable.
Thank you. Councillor Riley, you had a question?
Yes, you mentioned there's temporary buildings. Does that mean a tent, or does that just mean like a shell of a structure when you mention temporary structures?
Yeah, so there are small structures on the site, which Sherry, I'm sure, will talk about as well. So they are structures, so wooden structures that are less than 10 square meters. We have had the building department come out to the site to inspect those structures. We've not been informed of any violations, so it's our understanding that it meets all Ontario Building Code requirements. Those were established under the temporary use, which allowed for huts, which are essentially these small structures, which we defined, which our client interpreted as less than 10 square meters, i.e. not needing a building code compliance. And so those do exist on the site. They've been evaluated by the building department. I'm sure Sherry can speak to that as well. And then the idea is that these can be movable, so you can move them around essentially as props on the site. So they can create these little villages, or and then we've established in our drawings, which are in the report, of where they would approximately be located and where they could move around to.
Okay. Any further questions? We have a motion to receive then. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you, Beverly. Well, if you're going to hang around, we'll have that report coming up shortly, and we'll see what we can do. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
The next item is regarding the same proposal, proposed rezoning to permit staging of commercial outdoor role-playing games at 36 Walkers Road, Verulam, related to item 9.1 on the agenda. Larry Junkin. It is our understanding we have audio, but not a video. So can you hear me, Larry?
Yes, I can.
Okay, we can hear you. So just a reminder, you have 5 minutes, sir. Go ahead.
Okay, so I would like to apologize for the technical difficulties, but I represent a group of concerned residents that has been involved in this process since the beginning, approximately 4 years ago. The file has been shifted 4 times amongst 3 planners, which I'm sure is very frustrating for the applicant as well. So where we want to address what's going on, in September 11th, 2019, a public meeting was held, and it was very specific that it was a seasonal May to November specific time frame, long weekends only, and was proposed for a 1-story building, 90 square meters, a single-story building, administration building, 60 square meters, and a total of 300 square meters of permanent and temporary structures, as well as there was conditions in that report about the driveway access of 7.2 meters wide, being a commercial driveway. Driveway has been a contentious issue right from the initial application. The existing one is on the side of a hill. We've gone through 3 years of temporary use, 1-year extension, so that's a total of 4. Now we're asking for another 3 years of temporary use, potentially as of today, 6 years, which would bring it to a total of 10 years of temporary use. The driveway has been assessed by the roads department. It is documented in 2 of the road studies that have been done. The last current one that was done was in 2018, and that was supplied by Sherry there today, which we had. And it's very specific on the time frame of the use of that property, being that no events held from November to April. Now we're proposing a year-round usage on a driveway that is on the side of a hill that does not meet. So our thinking, or it's not aspect, is that the city assumes the liability for allowing this to continue when it's put into 2 reports already that needs to be done and is not being addressed in the bylaw in front of you. The changes from the original public meeting have it going from the 2 buildings to 3 plus a washroom, and changing the maximum square footage of permanent and meters to 600 square meters. We don't feel that is a minor change. That is doubling the size, both of buildings and size, as well as it was specific at the public meeting of when the events were going to be held. We were going from a May to November time frame, and now we're going to a year round. So since that public meeting, the public, i.e. neighbors, has had no input until this report, which we received on Monday of this week, showing these major changes, not minor, and that's what has been put into that. That is probably some of the bigger things. Also, what has been addressed with numerous of the planners and was addressed at one of the meetings was about the noise aspect. And we had asked whether there was a noise survey and how they were going to mitigate it, because it's as per the applicant, is a loud, boisterous activity, which is done on every long weekend for the neighbors. That has not been done. Now, we've had consultation this week with Sherry, and she's saying everything will be dealt with in the official plan, which now we're proposing 6 years out. So now you're putting the residents without any input in a situation where they haven't had any say. And I think we'll be quite surprised, especially the ones that already know about it, that we're changing from a seasonal to a year-round usage. So in that sense, we're asking for, that this should go back to public consultation because of the major changes, and the issues that we have put forth be dealt with prior to, going any further. And I realize the COVID aspect, but we asked, originally was asked for 3 years. It was extended a year, and now we're asking for an extension of 6 years to put a plan together. Doesn't seem very realistic in that sense of things. So that's basically it in a nutshell. The concern being the driveway, not safe, especially if we're going to year-round usage. The non-consultation over what we consider major changes with the residents in the area. And time.
Thank you, Mr. Junkin. Appreciate you sharing your concerns with us. We'll get a motion to receive, and we'll see if there's any questions for you, if you'll just hang on for a bit. Councillor Elmsley will move that, seconded by Councillor Seymour Fagan. Councillor Elmsley, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, through you. Mr. Junkin, thank you for coming forward today and for your deputation. Do you represent a group of neighbors, or are you speaking pretty much for yourself?
For not a group, yes, and some other people in the area. And to address that, I guess one of the concerns is like we've asked for what the maximum sustainable capacity environmentally, because it's beside a significant woodland as well as fish habitat. We get referred back to the waste management aspect on that. What one of the concerns is, and I'm sure if any of the councilors have been around, is there a possibility of a Larry Pool or rave, 10,000 people on the site? So yes, that is neighbor and concerned other people.
Thank you. Also, are you generally in favor of this project, or would you say that the group you represent feel that they would prefer it not to go forward?
So we have no issue with the event. We would probably, it's good for the economy in that aspect there. It's just the process that has come to date and the changes. It's like, so if you have a public meeting in September and the report from this new thing is in November, that you're going to double the size and go to a year-round thing. What we have been working to up until that point was identical to the original application. We've never opposed it, and the people that we talk with don't oppose it. What we do oppose is, once again, what is the capacity? What can the community expect on an agricultural piece of property at a maximum capacity? And like I say, because it's a significant woodland and fish habitat, what will that property support with those additional factors? It's not just a piece of property, right? There's two parts to that scenario. And you have a camping aspect. The bylaw is very specific on how many tents you can have. It has no bearing on how many people can be there. So you can say, oh, we can have 60 tents. Well, yeah, you can have 60 tents, but they're saying we have, day usage. Well, what's day usage? Is it 500 people? Is it 5,000 people? That's a question. You know what I mean? And I think that's a legitimate question from the people around it, because, like, once again, we've experienced some events that have been over capacity.
Thanks for that. Really what you would like is another public meeting in order to get some of these questions answered, and also to be reassured that the structures and the infrastructure, such as the driveways, are done to municipal standards?
100%, and that has been always from the get-go, and in all the meetings they've said we have not been opposed to this. We want to get it right the first time. It's like, rather than coming back to council and going, oh, we didn't cross our T's or dot our I's. If this property is sold in 6 months' time, the way that bylaw reads, the next owner can basically do what he wants. You know what I mean? In that regards there. Yes, we can have the commitment from the original applicant, but we have to put in place in this day and age, the parameters. And we're not limiting the size. If they say the property can handle 300 people, fantastic. I'm the best, right? We wish them the best in that regards. But if you dump that many people onto that property, that becomes a concern. So let's address it now prior to.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Junkin? Councillor Seymour Fagan, go ahead.
Thank you, through you. Hi, Mr. Junkin. I'm just wondering, have you been negatively impacted by this facility?
Personally, no. And like I say, we're not against it. The driveway aspect is probably one of the biggest contentious issues. And once again, we go back to the original application that was brought up at that time, and it would be addressed. Here we are 4 years later, and it's still not addressed, and not addressed in the bylaw going ahead.
I've been there, so I'm just wondering, with the driveway, I don't know what the issue is with that.
The issue is it's on the side of a hill. It's a commercial way. 2 separate traffic studies show that that's not acceptable. There's no line of sight. Now you're going to operate in a winter operation, right, on the side of a hill. My original proposal was to bring buses in. Can't happen where it is. So that's a possibility. That was put out there that people could be bussed in. So it doesn't work. And the roads has been out and assessed it, right? And they're, it's part of the process. So
okay.
They're adhering to it.
Thank you. You seem to have a concern about their expanding the events and the capacity. So I don't think it looked like they were expanding the events. They were just wanting to hold more events, not doubling the size of people. I think there's a limited amount of people that do this. Because I know that they also have volunteers that run it. So is it the capacity you're thinking that's going to be the issue, when that's not what they're talking about? They're talking about hosting more events. Thank you.
I agree. Yes, they're hosting more events, which is not an issue. The hosting of more events is not an issue. The question goes back to what environmentally will that piece of property sustain? And two, what is some capacity? So it's like when we had the HIP concert in Bob Cajun. Were you planning on being in the area in there? No, you avoided it because you knew there was going to be a massive influx of people. As it's stated in the bylaw, they're specifying how many tents you can have. They're saying, well, depending on the wastewater management study, is how many people you can have. But it really doesn't say, is the event 150 people or 1,500 people? And it's not that that's what it is. The residents should have a thing going, yes, it's going to be a very busy weekend. We should avoid the area.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Duncan. Councillor Riley has a question.
Thanks very much for your presentation, Larry, and I realize your entrance concerns and your environmental concerns. And you mentioned noise as well. I just want to remind you that in an agricultural area, we can also have quarries, we can have corn dryers, grain dryers, we can have large feedlots, which are all very necessary and needed in our community. So from a perspective of noise for this event, I attended the HIP concert and I thought it was a great event and close to 25,000 people. So anyways, and I know you're in support and generally of this, but from a noise perspective, I would have to suggest that, in my opinion, that there's many more uses that would be far noisier than this. So, thank you.
Yes, and I would agree with that aspect of what you're saying there. But I mean, the proposal is every long weekend, right? And has been every long weekend, right? So, you know, yes, that's what it is. What the question was is, if the events, and once again going back to size, what is the capacity and how are you going to mitigate that sound, or how are you going to place it? Not that you can't have noise, but it's like no difference than the dirt bike track that is up on Somerville. I mean, that was a contentious issue. Yes, you can hear that every weekend, right? From where I am. Yes, you can hear the roar every weekend. And after the thought, right? Yes, we can see that. And yes, it's going to have noise, but I mean, I think it's a due diligence of the applicant to be able to go, yes, we've done the best we can. Yes, you're going to hear a bit, but you mean, what can be done to sustain that, right?
Okay, thanks, Mr. Duncan. We don't have any more questions. We have a motion to receive your deputation. All in favor? That's passed. This item's coming up a little bit later on the agenda, Mr. Duncan, and we'll see what we can do. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move down to item 6.4, which is our last deputation, the use of off-road vehicles on boundary roads. That is related to item 10.1.4 on the agenda, which has been extracted. Heather Stobel. I should know how to pronounce that name.
Hi.
Hi, can you hear me okay? There you are.
I can, and just to give you...
We can hear you.
Just to give you a warning, there's a little yellow symbol on my internet. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Hello?
Yep, you got 5 minutes.
Can
Go
you hear
ahead.
me?
Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm here to speak as a former board member and also a resident in this area. I was on the Ganaraska board at a time when we were doing a forest management plan and preparation for the renewal of that plan. And I thought it might be important for you to have the report. This report really is based on the premise that this would be a good thing for the Ganaraska forest and tourism, environmental, etc. But the reality is that the Ganaraska is struggling at this point with the number of ATVs that are there. The neighboring municipalities do not have ATV allowed on their roads. And just to quickly go through this PDF that I sent you earlier, I sent you a copy of the map, and I also sent you a copy of some of the pictures that are in the Ganaraska report and also the forest management report that, or forest management plan that outline what some of the issues are. So just going through, the Ganaraska was heavily forested and farmed as early as the 1800s. There was a widespread removal of the timber in the area, and the result was an expansive dust bowl that was basically a desert. The topsoil was blown or washed away, and agriculture became such a struggle that many of the farmers in the area actually abandoned their farms. There was widespread poverty. So as early as 1922, there were efforts to protect it. In 1871, Sir John A. said that we're recklessly destroying the timber and there's scarcely a possibility of replacing it. After 1940, it was protected. This was because there was regular flooding that went all the way down to Port Hope. It was affecting salmon stocks. It flooded the town. There was difficulty growing any crops. It had become unproductive. There was widespread poverty and famine. So they began a reforestation effort with hedgerows, tree planting, riparian zones along the waterways. And the second page of the PDF that I sent you shows the pictures of the area at the time. And there's sand dunes, basically. The picture to the right in the middle on the second page of the PDF looks like a sloped road. It's in fact sand drifting across the road, and it blocked the roadways. And at the bottom of the page, in the middle of the page, you can see the sand in the area. So there was a huge amount of erosion. It does sit on the Oak Ridges Moraine. Most of the area from Bethany south to Highway 9, which is in Clarington, is on the Oak Ridges Moraine. And this is a very quick graphic to show you how it was formed, basically by two glaciers coming together and then receding and depositing sand and gravel. So you get this ridge of sand and gravel. And that ridge is now the filtration system for the water that forms many of the creeks and rivers that flow north and south from that ridge, including the Pigeon River and the Scugog River. So that is now the source water for at least 250,000 people, and 3 million people get their water indirectly through that. There's a page with a satellite map, and the dark spot in the middle of the page is the current Ganaraska forest, which is heavily forested. It's been a very successful effort. It's taken 80 years. The gray area to the left of that shows you where the sand and gravel pits are that run along Durham 20, which is the boundary road between Manvers and Clarington. So that's what it did look like before the reforestation efforts started 80 years ago. The forest management plan is available on the Ganaraska Forest website. The next page shows you the cover page for that, with a picture of the board members who went on the tour before we finalized that plan, which would have been in 2016, and then it was adopted in 2017. There are a number of pictures showing some of the key areas where there's been ongoing problems with erosion, and they've actually had to close those trails because they're very steep. Some of them are 70-degree angles, and there is no vegetation left in these areas. As you can see, it looks like gravel. It's sand and gravel. And there are still, as of a couple of days ago, people going on those trails, and they are continuing to go on them despite the fact that they've been closed and there's signage. And somebody even posted it on YouTube.
Can I just get you to wrap it up, Heather? Your 5 minutes is just about up, so if you just come to a conclusion, please, thanks.
Yeah. So the last page shows the signage. it's hard to see in a picture, but the slopes are extremely difficult, extremely steep. And the final page is a letter from the Ganaraska. So notwithstanding the issues that surround any ATVs on roads, the Ganaraska in particular does not support ATV access off the municipal roads. They have a great deal of trouble dealing with the ATVs that are currently in there, and it is at or above capacity at this point. And so I want to make sure that the council members know that, and that it is not supported. And if there is any other decision to be made, I would hope that it would go through the proper process, because this is not an emergency. And in the meantime, it's not supported. And so I ask that you receive and take no further action. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thanks, Heather. I'll get a motion to receive the deputation and the correspondence that was in your package. Councillor Vale, seconded by Councillor Dunn. Thank you. Are there any questions for the deputant? I have one quick one, Heather. If you've raised some environmental issues about the Ganaraska Conservation, why isn't the board dealing with those issues if they're such a concern? And then I guess my follow-up is if there's such an environmental threat down there, or has been, why do they allow any motorized vehicles? Why do they issue permits for any motorized vehicles in the conservation area at all?
Well, that's an ongoing discussion. And the ATVs were there before the Oak Ridges Moraine legislation came in. So they have allowed some ATVs in, and they can still go to the parking areas, but they have continued to have enforcement issues. It is an ongoing discussion. They had to close a number of trails to allow for some restoration, and they continue to have difficulties. It's possible that if it continues to be a problem, there will be a decision, but at the moment, they're trying to allow for some ATVs to continue in some of the areas where the damage is not a problem.
Thank you. We have a motion to receive. All in favor? That's passed. This item has been extracted on our agenda, Heather, so if you want to stick around and see where we go, we'll see what we can do, but thanks for sharing your concerns with us. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move into item 7. That's it for deputations. We'll move into item 7, which is 7.1, off-road vehicle use on municipal roads presentation by Mr. Dave Lemke, Public Works Road Manager, West A. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the opportunity to present today. And I just want to start off as saying this presentation is kind of an overview of the upcoming changes to the Highway Traffic Act and Regulation 316, which is coming into effect January 1st of next year. I also would like to take this opportunity to just thank the other departments in their input into this presentation, risk management, municipal law enforcement, economic development, and the roads group. Everybody had a part in this, and it was a good team effort. So a bill was tabled entitled Getting Ontario Moving. So with that, Part 10.3 of the Act deals with off-road vehicles. Regulation 316 of that Act deals with the operation of off-road vehicles on highways. There were amendments made to this Act by the provincial government. And like I said before, it will be coming into effect January 1st of next year. So these next couple slides are just some of your typical off-road vehicles. You've got your, your ATVs, your side-by-sides. Newly added to the list are off-road motorcycles and XTVs, or extreme terrain vehicles. Effective July 1st of this year, the province expanded the type of off-road vehicles permitted on roads, and the changes include allowing the XTVs and the off-road motorcycles to use the shoulder of public roads where permitted. So the next few slides we'll look at the changes to the Act. My hope was not to read the regulation verbatim, so I've kind of summarized it for these slides. I hope that's all right. Section 191.8, subsection 2 of the Act, the Minister may make regulations. They've added subsection 2.1. In summary, the regulation would not apply to any highway under the jurisdiction of a municipality if the municipality in question has created a bylaw to restrict the operation of off-road vehicles. The second change, section 191.8, subsection 3, the council of a municipality may pass bylaws. They've repealed subsection 3A and have changed it to a municipal council may pass a bylaw to prohibit or allow off-road vehicles to use all or some of municipal right-of-ways. Sorry, did I get ahead of myself on that? Sorry, I skipped a slide there, I apologize. Another change, subsection 191.8. Municipal council may pass a bylaw to prohibit or allow ORVs. Section 191.8, subsection 4, bylaws may regulate times of operation. It was repealed and replaced with a bylaw passed under subsection 3 may apply only during specified times. So what does this mean? This means essentially the regulatory amendments enable the use of municipal road allowances unless the municipality restricts the use by bylaw. The regulation is intended to open the use of municipal roads to off-road vehicles where supported by local council. City of Kawartha Lakes already has a council-approved bylaw to regulate off-road vehicle use in the municipality. The permitted use is outlined in Schedule A of this bylaw. Council can decide if changes are needed to the current bylaw. So we'll look at a couple items from the risk management viewpoint. There are numerous aspects of the road's environment that would need to be taken into consideration and discussed, such as traffic type and volume. For example, haul routes, farming use, cottagers, cyclists, and pedestrians. We'd also need to look at the existing road conditions, sight lines, as well as local concerns that might only be known to staff or the local stakeholders. Future plans for the area would also need to be reviewed. Additionally, some aspects considered might also be, is there enough room for the off-road vehicles to travel safely? What seasonal restrictions are there? This also feeds back to the previous slide where we discussed the local knowledge. Do we need more education for the public and users, which we will also touch on in the next slides to come? And additional signage, would it be needed? What would the future budget considerations look like? And communication is key for all the stakeholders involved. The city has a duty of care to ensure compliance with the minimum maintenance standards, also known as the MMS. We would need to determine additional maintenance and inspection needs. Do we need to update or change the way we currently do business by reviewing existing policies and procedures? And of course, there's the financial implications that need to be understood and considered. Also, from an assurance perspective, we need to ask the professionals, what does this mean for us? Now we'll look at roads operations. To date, we, the roads group, have not seen a marginal increase in maintenance needs and costs in the north half of the city where off-road vehicle use is permitted under Schedule A of the current bylaw. There is always the typical weekend damage, such as fishtails and burnouts from the traveling public. There's also additional mud tracked onto the road after the weekend's huge deluge of rain, but nothing that might raise a red flag at this time for us. So what does this mean for municipal law enforcement? Of course, the enforcement of our bylaw starts with municipal law enforcement. A review of the current bylaw and possible amendments may be needed. To date, very few complaints have been received. Again, there could be potential financial impacts that would need to be explored. Pending the stance council might take, there may need to be an increased enforcement need that would impact the response time for other issues that might arise. Currently, municipal law enforcement does not have the authority to stop vehicles on municipal highways. This may lead to an increased municipal law enforcement requests to the police services for assistance. Police services and municipal law enforcement have teamed up recently to conduct trail stops to ensure everyone is being safe. As mentioned in a previous slide, public education and communication is key. For municipal police services, police services do not have an off-road vehicle in their fleet at this time. Purchasing the equipment and maintenance would need to be budgeted for in the future. They would ensure that their officers would be trained in safe operation techniques of the off-road vehicles, as well as a partnership with the city and other stakeholders would be key to educate the public and riders to ensure everyone is safe and understands what is needed and required. So economic impacts. The Destination Ontario ATV Program Partnership Report states that Ontario's economic impacts from off-highway vehicle users currently results in over $211 million in GDP. It creates over 9,000 direct and indirect jobs and contributes $27 million annually in tax revenue for provincial and federal governments, with an additional $5.8 million in tourism spending, and creates an additional 60 full-time equivalent jobs. So that was taken right out of that report. Impacts to the city of Kawartha Lakes. ATV riding is a popular shoulder season activity in Kawartha Lakes, contributing to tourism, visitation, and visitor spending in the slower seasons of spring and fall. Enhancing ATV trail connections and opportunities for ATV riders to visit communities and businesses in Kawartha Lakes has the potential to increase visitor spending and overall visitation to the region. Development of ATV trail connections in Kawartha Lakes aligns with the goals set out in the corporate and economic development strategic plans. By enhancing tourism and expanding visitation into the shoulder season and winter and connect these off-road activities to culture. So you can read more about the goals in that handout that you actually got at the start of council today. So let's discuss some options. Option 1, stay the course. Do not change the way we currently enforce off-road vehicle use in the city. Option 2, repeal bylaw 2019-77 and adhere to the changes in the Highway Traffic Act and Ontario Regulation 316. As I mentioned earlier, that regulation comes into effect January of next year. Or option 3, take the team approach. Under Council's leadership, enlist the help of staff, stakeholders, and other interested parties to determine if in fact an ORV route is possible and what it might look like if one is indeed found. If required, we could amend the existing bylaw to allow for this. So for us, our next steps, we will bring a report to Council in October that can discuss a little more in depth what this might mean for other stakeholders that might be out there in the public. Questions or comments?
Great, thank you, David. I appreciate that. We'll get a motion to receive your presentation, Councillor Yeo and Seymour Fagan. Are there any questions for Mr. Lemke? Councillor Yeo, go ahead.
Thanks for that, Dave. And my one question is, after all that, I'm still not sure what the new 316 is. Will that actually allow ATV and off-road vehicles on provincial highways? Yes or no?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, indeed, what the amendments are in the Act will allow all right-of-ways within the province to permit off-road vehicle use unless the municipality that has jurisdiction creates bylaw to restrict. To restrict, yes. So in essence, they've flipped from the original, they've gone the other way.
But we can't put a bylaw in place to restrict on a provincial highway, can we?
Through you, Mr. Mayor.
So
No,
you're opening them up to the provincial highways?
Sorry, it's all highways under municipal jurisdiction. So that would not include the provincial highways, Highway 7 and 35.
Right, thank you. Okay, you good? Go ahead.
No, that's the part I'm confused about. So on like Highway 35 through Coboconk, will this have any effect on that? Because it's a provincial highway.
So from the regulation, my understanding is we could not restrict use to Highway 35 and 7, but with the new amendments, it would allow use, yes. The province could determine if they in fact want to use those corridors for ATV routes.
Me too, thanks. Councillor Helmsley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Not to be argumentative, but I think, doesn't the bill say except for the King's highways, which would be all the provincial highways, that it would not, that access to those would not be allowed?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the document I have been referencing did not state that, but I can look a little deeper and get back. But yeah, anything I reviewed, in the Act, I didn't mention that. But I can get back to you.
Thanks, Dave. Because I was under the impression that provincial highways were not included. It was only municipal roads and municipal highways. Which brings me to a point. It talks about highways and byways, I think. What about municipal streets? Are they now opened up as well, all municipal streets? Or can you have routes through towns, cities, and villages?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, again, my understanding is all roads, the road network under the jurisdiction of the municipality could be considered for a route, unless council decides to restrict access to certain roads.
Okay. You mentioned that a report is coming forward in October. Will that report recommend a joint committee? We used to have a Trails Committee. Is it going to recommend a joint committee such as the Trails Committee to come up with a way of organizing routes and what roads will be included and what roads may not be included?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, there will be recommendations about if there is a preferred route or maybe there isn't. That would be discussed in that report coming to council.
Thank you. Councillor Ashmore.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to David. Just trying to get understanding it. So you mentioned the word corridor. So under this Bill 107, are we going to be able to kind of lax these rules, or is it just going to be ATVs allowed in corridors, or are they going to be allowed on all municipal streets? Because I'll talk to that in a minute after you answer that, but is it just, like you're talking about corridors, like specified trails that they're only going to be allowed to go onto, like say south of County Road 8, for an example?
No, as he mentioned in the presentation, and I think Councillor Helmsley asked the same question, any roads under the jurisdiction of the municipality, if the municipality chooses, they'll be allowed on them.
Okay, so I'll give you an example. Communities, I can name a lot of them. I'll give 2 examples. Victoria Place and Thurstonia. Victoria Place, about 500 people. People use their golf carts. They're energy efficient. They're no pollution. They get them from point A to point B because they cannot get to that distance to the clubhouse. And yet bylaw and police are coming down and cracking down on them. Thurstonia.
Yeah, but
Thurstonia's
Councillor
one.
Ashmore, that you're going on another issue. That's the current bylaw that's in place. This bylaw that the province, or what this province is proposing, is to release that they're allowed on all municipal roads if the municipality chooses. Right now, under the Highway Traffic Act, the municipality doesn't have that choice. So before we start going on a tangent about bylaw enforcing what they have to enforce, this is the possibility for our council to change that if we choose to do that when that report comes forward in October.
Well, okay, I'll just say I hope we do change that, because I think the people will be certainly welcome that, to have the ability to have mobility around their communities. Right now, if they try and use their ATV or their golf cart, you know, they get nailed, and they don't like it, and they want the change, and hopefully our council will change that.
Well, we'll have that opportunity in October when some different options come forward. We can decide where we want to go from there. It's not just about getting around the community, right? You've got people that are going to be tearing up and down the sides of highways in all different communities as well. So we have to take the whole picture into account, but I know where you're coming from. Did you have a question, Councillor?
Actually, I was just echoing what Doug said, that I know 35 and 7 are not included in that scope.
Well, we'll get clarification on that just to make sure, but I think, so it's funny, the province passes regulation that allows ATVs and motorized vehicles on municipal roads, but not on their own roads. Yeah. How neat. We'll get clarification. I know that's not your fault, don't worry. Any other questions for Dave? Okay, we have a motion to receive the presentation. Thank you for that. All in favor? That's passed. Thanks for coming today. We appreciate it. Are you going to stick around for a bit? We get to our report a little bit later in the south part of the city. Thank you. Okay, we'll go to item 8, which is the Planning Advisory Committee. We have some recommendations. We have to, okay, what are we doing here? We have to extract, from the advisory committee, we have to extract 832 because we're just changing the bylaw a little bit, and we have a memo from Ian, and I believe Ian's on the line, if you can, if we can pull him up. He's put a memo in just explaining why we have to change the correction to the bylaw or the report for 832. So if Ian's available, there he is. Hello, sir. How are you?
Good afternoon.
Yeah,
Mayor Latham,
we can hear you, Ian. So you've added a memo with a bit of an explanation. So that's part of our agenda. It was in our package. Do you want to just give us an overview of that on why we're making that change?
Certainly. So yesterday afternoon, I was contacted by Clark Consulting Services, the applicant for this development. The proposed zoning bylaw, what we were doing was repealing the Fenland portion that exists today and then just replacing it in its entirety again with the few changes that were needed and necessary for this proposed development. They originally had reviewed it, said everything looks good, the draft bylaws that were prepared for council, and then I believe their client had noted there's an issue as it relates to the proposed garden center. There will be a structure for that portion of the development. Again, this was shown on the original drawings and so was contemplated as part of the original public meeting notice. No one had identified any issues with this. This is really just a technical amendment to change from the existing 43-meter setback that applied and was in place because of the original built form with the building at the rear of the lot to now have a 12-meter setback applying to the development across the entire site. So the C2 zone in Fenland Falls has a 12-meter setback within it, and by putting the 12-meter setback in the Fenland Township portion, it will be a consistent setback to the front yard for that purpose. So we did have a request from the consultant. We are recommending via that memo that we include the additional wording in accordance with section 3417 of the Planning Act, that no further public notice or public meeting is necessary because the change is minor in nature. And then that becomes a final and binding. So the decision can't be appealed on the basis of not providing further public meeting notice if council puts that in there. Thank you.
Okay, so just while we've got you on the line, if we go over to 832, the actual report, so what are we changing in the wording of that report? Are we changing that the zoning bylaw amendment respecting application 2020-014 be prepared, approved, and adopted as amended? Would that be the simple change to the wording in that approved report?
To you, Mr. Mayor, yes, that would be correct.
Okay, any questions for Ian? I just need a motion to receive the memo. Councillor O'Reilly and Vale. Are there any questions for Ian about clarity? Everybody's clear? Okay, all in favor? That's passed. Thanks, Ian. Appreciate that. We'll go to our planning minutes. So if I can get a motion, is there any other extractions from the planning minutes? Can I get a motion from that the minutes of the August 12th, 20 Planning Advisory Committee be received and the recommendations included in section 8.3 except 832 of the agenda be adopted? Councillor O'Reilly and Vale, you'll move that. Any questions? All in favor? That's passed. And then 832, the motion is there. I'm not going to read the whole motion, but it's that the zoning bylaw amendment respecting application be prepared, approved, and adopted as amended, as per the original. Will you move that, Councillor Richardson? Because I can see you now out the side here, so I know you think I'm ignoring you, but I'm not. You'll move that as amended? Thank you. And Councillor Elmsley, you'll second that? Any questions? All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. I'm going to try to do better. Don't worry. I know I've got you guys on the peripheral here. Okay, so that's the planning, and now we're going to go over to planning reports. So this is the proposed rezoning to permit the staging of commercial outdoor role-playing games at 36 Walkers Road. We had a couple deputations. I think Sherry Ray is going to join us. Hello, Sherry. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, we can hear you. So do you want to, we have this report that's coming directly to council for approval as per a previous recommendation. Do you have an update? Do you want to give us a quick overview of why this is here and some of the concerns? Did you hear the deputations? Maybe some of the concerns that were brought up there?
Yes, I did, and prepared to speak to them, sir.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to members of council. The report before you speaks to an application to amend the Township of Verlem zoning bylaw to permit the commercial use of hosting outdoor role-playing games at 36 Walkers Road. As you heard from both Beverly Saunders today and Larry Junkin, there are issues that are being discussed even now. They outlined the fact that this is the clients William Ashby and Al Gale McGale are running the Underworld LARP, which is the live action role playing. And just briefly, in May of 2016, council passed the temporary use zoning bylaw for a 3-year period. On April 23rd, 2019, council once again granted a 1-year extension. This is all information you've heard. It's quite accurate. And then due to COVID-19 and with no clear legislation to continue the temporary use, the temporary use unfortunately lapsed. However, staff was processing the permanent use. So what's before you today is trying to come to submit a bylaw that is acceptable to everyone for a permanent use on the land. Following the public meeting, and this is key to what Beverly spoke to, and then Larry or Mr. Junkin spoke to, is that there was a change. The year-round use was proposed instead of a seasonal use, and the seasonal use was or the year-round use was really to accommodate some single-day winter uses on the site. If you can imagine, there's no buildings other than the temporary huts or sheds that you've seen in my report. So they're not looking at an extensive winter use. They also requested an increase from 30 square meters to from 300 square meters to 600 square meters. Once again, not a significant change. As Bev alluded to in her presentation, we are looking at approximately 1% of the percentage coverage of the lot, and that is being maxed in the bylaw. Under the Township of Verlam zoning bylaw, it is permitted at 10%, which is way more build out on the land. So there were some changes. We believe that they were minor. We have in the recommendation included what you just heard previously on Ian's report is a section 3417, where we are asking council to utilize that section of the Planning Act to not give any more notice. The report also outlines a number of issues that have been worked through with the planning consultant and the owners, that with respect to non-compliant buildings, additional information on existing structures, some site servicing, and the request for the continued use on the property. So in summary from the report, the application conforms to the 2019 road plan, is consistent with the 2020 PPS, conformity with the city's official plan has been demonstrated, and the rezoning recommends site-specific development standards to permit the LARP use permanently on the property. So staff notes that council has been circulated an amended bylaw, and please accept our apologies for it coming in rather last minute. The two bylaws are essentially the same. The one before you contains clauses that permit the permanent use with a holding provision the holding provision for site plan, and the continued use scenario for 3 years. Until such time that site plan has been entered into, then the H is removed. The previous bylaw in the planning report applied the H, but identified that if site plan wasn't done in 3 years, all the uses were no longer permitted. That was unacceptable to the planning consultant. We had some more discussions, and I presented the zoning bylaw with you today that says if in 3 years the site plan has not been submitted or approved, then the continuing use scenario stops, not the entire activity on the land. It still stays there with a holding provision. So now you heard from Beverly Saunders today. The first preference is no site plan. Staff doesn't support that in light of the applications or the concerns raised by not only Mr. Junkin, but from staff's perspective of operational issues, that what you really see are those in a site plan agreement and not in a zoning bylaw. Zoning bylaw deals with use. So with respect, I think that is my presentation, but I can certainly answer questions if you have some.
Thank you, Sherry. I have a couple, so I'm going to go first. There was some concerns raised with the driveway or the entrance, I guess, out to Walker's Road. I've been out to that site as well. Nothing really jumped out at me with any large concerns, but I mean, I don't live in the area. So was there any concerns or thought put into anything being done with that entrance just from a site perspective and some of the concerns that were raised?
And I think that's a good question, and it will be dealt with. Items such as entrance design, parking lot surface, that is all issues that are dealt with through site plan. Staff's original thought was that we would apply the holding until such time that site plan was done. But obviously there's been a continued use scenario introduced. I do recall, Mr. Junkin is quite right. We've had a number of planners involved in this file. I was the initial planner for the temporary use bylaw. We did see a setback, a 7.5 meter reference in that temporary use bylaw, but that was applied because there was no other mechanism to achieve that width requirement. Subsequent to the passing of that temporary use bylaw, I believe Public Works had attended the site and changes were made to accommodate the zoning bylaw. So I believe it is setting at, it is set at the 7.5 meters now. Will we revisit it? Absolutely. That's what the site plan process is for, to revisit those details. So that's why you don't see it in the zoning bylaw you have before you. The mechanism is addressed through site plan.
Okay, so that brings me to my next point. So I'm on the planning committee, as you know, and, you know, usually we pass a rezoning and then official plan amendment, and then really nothing gets done with a property. There's a hold put on it until the site plan's approved, which, you know, gives staff time to deal with some of the concerns. So where I'm a little bit confused is we approved a temporary use, I get that, but now we're approving a continued use on this property, and we're allowing up to 3 years for a site plan. Why is the site plan not being presented with the rezoning and the application so that we know exactly what it is they're proposing before council's being asked to approve this on a permanent basis? Like, why are we approving this? They're going to continue to use it, and yet 3 years, or they're asking for 5 or 6 years down the road until a site plan is put in place. Help me understand the rationale for that. Why aren't we just putting a hold on it until a site plan can be put in place? And then if they don't build out for 3 or 4 or 5 years, then that's on them. But at least they have a plan that we're comfortable with, we know they're going to build into. So can you comment on that?
They're good points. I think what staff was attempting to do is find an opportunity where, due to the number of years passing, perhaps through COVID, it's giving the option that the activity can continue. But you will notice in the zoning bylaw, they're afforded only this 300 square meters, and the less a number of tents. The tent sizes have been capped, and we're recognizing the existing gravel parking lot. So you're quite right. Council does have the option to just permit the permanent use and apply the holding. I think staff was working with all parties to try and achieve some agreement.
Yeah, no, that's no problem. I'm just trying to sort of figure out why we're going this direction. So thank you. Councillor Elmslie, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple. Like you, I'm glad to hear that the driveway issue is going to be dealt with. My other issue is how many occupants or how many people can the site accommodate?
What the basis of the attendees, it was based on the servicing agreements that were prepared by Cambium, and they identified 150 would be the max, 50 would be the daytime attendees, and then 100 would be through the accommodations on site through tents only. As I said, the agreement or the study spoke to both scenarios. So in the absence of site plan, the property owner is on his honor that he will abide by those regulations of 150 people cap. You would not see, I guess the activity could be, I believe Mr. Junkin referenced 1,000 people. That would be not in his best interest to have that occur because we are waiting for site plan. But in the site plan agreement is where you see those nuts and bolts of numbers. That it's not really, you can place them in the zoning bylaw, you can cap the number, but it's not usually where you see those numbers capped.
Thank you. The other concern I have is that there was a public meeting, but then there were changes after the public meeting, and I would certainly like to see another meeting held so that the neighbors and other interested parties could be comfortable with the changes that have been made and get to ask questions and get to register any concerns they may have. So, Mr. Mayor, I would have further that's to the report.
Let's just
that-
get some questions first if we can, and
Yeah.
then if you want to
I was just
propose
putting you
something-
on notice, and I don't know whether you want to do it as a follow-up or whether you want to do it included before we pass the report.
Well, let's see what the questions are, and then I'll come back to you, and you can take a
Thank
crack
you.
at it. Councillor Dunn, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one quick question. If in fact council decides they want to extend this to 6 years, this motion would have to be altered because it says 3 years in the report?
It would be in the passing of the bylaw. The bylaw, the one that council was circulated on in your yellow folders, there is a clause. It doesn't have a number applied to it, but underneath the removal of holding provisions, there is a provision that states on the land that's zoned A118H, which is just the site-specific number for that site, should the holding symbol not be removed 3 years from the passing of the bylaw, then the above noted provisions regarding the continued use scenario shall not be permitted. So you would simply take out the 3 years, place the 6 years.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
Councillor Seymour Fagan?
Yes, thank you. There was concern about environmental impact. Do you see any negative environmental impact?
I would not have the ability to comment on that. There was an environmental review completed by Niblet, and they have indicated that there would not be any negative impact at either the continued use scenario or at the full build out. Because you have to remember the full build out is less than 1% coverage on the lot, and it's capped at 600 square meters, which is roughly, because I think in Imperial is a little over 6,000 square feet total build out on the lands.
Okay, thank you. And one more. Do you see a downside if we extended it to 6 years right now?
Yes, I would. I believe that this property owner started this business in 2016, has had ample time to achieve site plan approval. There is a question, there were a number of planning consultants involved as well. So whether or not the information wasn't given to him correctly, or the amount of money, so now there's a bit of a financial hardship. But notwithstanding that, is council is looking at we call it temporary use, but it's really a continuing use in the absence of the assurances that we normally look for on behalf of council through site plan control.
Okay. Yes? Hello? Kathleen? Yes? Okay. So I agree with your comments. I think, Sherry, I think 6 years is too long. I think they've got an opportunity, and in fairness to everybody, they need to go on this. So why, when these changes were made to the use or the coverage or the time and, you know, all the concerns that were brought, these changes that have been made since the original temporary use, why did you not deem another public meeting necessary? Because I don't think it's necessary, but I'm just wondering why planning didn't look at it and we need another public meeting. Is it because they've gone from 0.75% coverage to 1% and that's considered minor? Because personally, I think this is, yeah, go ahead.
And that's a difficult question for me to answer, as I'm the planner that is really due to the traveling on of some of our staff and the matter coming back to me. and the applicant has been waiting for us. COVID has extended his wait as well. So I looked at it from the point of view that the change, because we're really accommodating the year-round use for a limited amount of events, which once again are solidified through the site plan process. That's why staff's initial preference was to have that holding provision right away. I felt that one was not required from that because I believe that the applicant, the owner, is really running a limited number of off-peak season events, one or two. I think Beverly spoke in her presentation of one a month in the winter time, which would be after the November. And then you mentioned it, Your Worship, is the increase in lot coverage still remains under 1%. And really the 300 square meters, and it may have been an error from the first planning consultant, did not allow for the administrative building and the washroom facility and the main town building that they refer to. It didn't allow for that to happen. So once again, an amalgamation of all of those buildings would be about, I think it's 6,300 square feet for the 40 hectares of property. So staff felt it was minor, and really we didn't have to go back to the public.
I agree. Thank you. Councillor Riley, go ahead.
Thanks very much, Sherry. I was kind of leaning towards 6 years myself, just because Beverly Saunders suggested that's fairly cost prohibitive for the people to go through a site plan. But the more I hear about it, I'm just kind of wondering, when you're talking about a number of different people on the on this file, are you talking about planning staff, or are you talking about their consulting staff? Because I'm just kind of wondering why they haven't, other than financial reasons, maybe come forward with a site plan.
I believe there were 2 planning consultants and 3 planning staff involved. And you'd have to, I don't know why they haven't come forward with probably because of the amount of studies involved, but in achieving, even though it took a wee bit, working through the various planners, they have achieved a lot of the components for site plan submission already, the further review. So really they're looking at the technical drafting of the site plan, lot grading and drainage plans, and those types of documents just to make the submission.
Thank you for that. I'm just trying to think that anything we can do to cooperate or enhance rural economic development is a great thing, but we also have to respect the rules and the processes as well.
Thank you. Any further questions for Sherry? Okay, thank you, Sherry. Stick around in case another questions comes up. Councillor Elmsley, you wanted put something forward?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I would move it as printed with the additional that it only be for 3 years instead of 6 years, and that another public meeting be held as soon as practical in order to hear the concerns of the neighbors and interested parties.
Okay, Sherry, just for clarification, Councillor, so this report recommends a 3, so we don't need to change that. They're proposing going to 6, but right now it's 3. I'm not seeing the value of having a public meeting after we pass this report. Wouldn't the value of another public meeting be to get input into this? We're saying we're going to pass it, and then we're going to have a public meeting after we've made a decision. I'm struggling with that motion. Can you help me out?
Was this to myself?
This was to yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir. The recommendation would not be as printed. That the second clause that the zoning bylaw amendments substantially in the form, it should be, there'll be now recognizing an amended zoning bylaw. And that's the one that was circulated to council. And if you pass the bylaw folds into the appeal period under the Planning Act, where there would be no changes.
So all it needs, okay. But
So
what's the
if you're
point in
going to
that?
have a
What
public
Counselor Helmsley's requesting a public meeting as part of approving this, and I'm questioning the need for a public meeting after we've approved it. It doesn't seem to make sense to me.
You would then end up having to rescind the bylaw that you are passing today if there are changes after the public meeting.
Thank
You
you.
would change this to a referral back to staff and hold your public meeting, and then staff would bring the bylaw back to you with any changes.
Okay, what do you want to do?
My rationale was that there's going to be a holding symbol on this. And if there's a holding symbol on it and you have a public meeting, you can, I believe, as a result of that holding symbol, if you hear the concerns, if there are any, because we've heard that people are in favor of this going forward, and I think that's true. They just want some questions answered. So with the holding symbol, I don't see why you couldn't have a public meeting and during that time period.
Okay, so the motion then is that the second that, Kathy, if you can just help me out, the second that zoning bylaw amendment as amended, because we've amended the bylaw already, and that includes the 3 years, keeping it at 3, and then you want to add that as part of this process, that another public meeting be held before the holding symbol is removed. Okay. Within the 3 years, yes. Seconder? Sherry, did you have a comment?
Yes, please. The holding provision only relates to what is outlined in the zoning bylaw, and that is for site plan approval and to have the archaeological assessment completed.
Okay. Seconder for the motion? Going once, going twice, motion's failed. Kathleen, do you want to take a crack at a motion?
As amended, pass it as amended.
Printed with the bylaw being amended, so
Yes.
that's at the 3 years, just so you know.
Yep.
Keeping it at 3 years.
Yep.
Okay, as printed with the bylaw being amended, which we have. Seconder, Councillor Yeo. Any further
Recorded
questions?
vote, please.
Recorded vote requested by Councillor Helmsley. Any further questions, comments? Do you want to speak to it, Kathleen?
I think that the planners have put together an excellent report. They've been working with this group for a few years, and I know that there's been some delays on both ends. But Sherry has asked us to amend the bylaw the way that they think is fit, and this is their job. So I think that we should do what it says in the amended bylaw.
Thank you. Councillor Yeo?
Thank you, and through you, I agree wholeheartedly. I think it's a wonderful idea. I think the land is very suited for it. We're talking about 1% of the entire 40 hectares, whatever it is. We're talking about limited numbers until the H symbol is removed, until they get to their full numbers. I think staff has shown great compromise already in offering 3 years, and to offer any more than 3 years, I think would be a stretch. So I think we're doing the right thing, and I hope you support it.
Agree completely. Thank you. Recorded vote is requested by Councillor Helmsley. I'm going to say Councillor Dunn, but you're not Councillor Dunn. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Kathy.
Deputy Mayor O'Reilly,
In favor.
Councillor Seymour Fagan,
In favor.
Councillor Yeo,
In favor?
Councillor Vale,
In favor.
Councillor Richardson,
In favor?
Councillor Ashmore,
In favor.
Councillor Elmsley, Councillor Dunn,
In favor.
Mayor Letham.
In favor.
So that's 8-1.
8 in favor, 1 opposed. Motion passes. Thank you. Thank you, Sherry. Appreciate your report and all the hard work there. Thanks. So let's take 5 minutes. It's 2:55. Let's come back at 3 o'clock and we'll deal with the consent agenda. Okay, we'll call the meeting back to order. We're going to go into our consent matters, but everything's been extracted, so we'll just go through the reports one at a time. Item 10.4, because Dave Lemke's here and he wants to anxiously get back to work, back to his real job, we'll pull that up in the agenda and we'll deal with it first. So the recommendation is that the use of off-road vehicles on boundary roads be received, that council supports the request from the Township of Cavan-Monaghan to allow the use of ATVs on designated sections of Drenol Road and Glamorgan Road, and that if chosen as the final route by the Township of Cavan-Monaghan, the bylaw be amended and brought forward to council for adoption. It's a boundary road. I think Dave's the author of the report. He's just here to answer any questions if we have them. Councillor Richardson, you extracted this report, so you go ahead and tell us what you want to do.
Perfect, thank you, and through you. The reason I extracted the report is I kind of wanted to state my position regarding this particular report. I am a current member with the Ganaraska Conservation, and I did actually reach out to the CAO regarding that letter. I mentioned to her at that time that was the first time I had seen it this week, was when it was circulated. So I, in no shape or form, was opposing what she wrote, but I also wanted her to understand my position from a local perspective. Currently, we have a lot of ATV users in our ward. A lot of those users do have a Ganaraska trail permit, and right now there's no legal way of getting from the Kawartha ATV, our trail system, to the Ganaraska. I also get a volume of emails regarding local residents that are fed up with the trespassing of these vehicles going across farmers' fields or traveling too quickly down these roads. So what I had said to her was I was actually receiving this report this week, and I was proposing maybe a trial approach of 1 year, a slow and steady approach way of actually helping our local residents and visitors to have that ability to safely and legally operate their off-road vehicles. Yesterday afternoon, I did receive an email from Linda, and she did say to me, "Thank you for the phone call yesterday. I do understand the position you are in and agree with the action you are considering moving forward." She also cleared up a few questions I had regarding parking lots and the access to the actual forest center. As we know, the Ganaraska Forest, it's been open for off-road motorized vehicles, the East and West Forest, since 1961. And it's a revenue generator for them. And no means are we telling them how many permits they need to sell. The whole premise of doing this is to create that new legal way of getting from our Victoria Rail Trail to the Ganaraska in my ward. There's a lot of different facts that I have looked at when taking this position. Obviously, the one, Bill 107, as per Dave's presentation today, and we know that is the new bill proposes to ease those restrictions, allowing those off-road vehicles. So I feel like changes are coming, and I think as a council we need to be ahead of those changes and think differently. I have noticed a significant increase in ATV use in my ward. I'm sure others have too. I reached out to the Kawartha ATV Association and asked them if their numbers have changed. I did get an email saying that in 2019 they had 1,707 members, and as of 2020, right now, ATVs and side-by-sides are now at 2,340 members. That's a significant change in a short time, and I really believe a lot of that's coming because of COVID, because families are home, families are looking for activities locally, and I believe this trend will continue. Also, around us, we have a lot of other municipalities that are doing off-road studies right now. They're looking at the off-road vehicles on their county roads. They've already opened, for example, in Peterborough County, they're undergoing this off-road study right now, and they have opened up some roads in Havelock and Duro-Dummer, and they're looking at other county roads. I think, as mentioned in your presentation, that in the future that council does look at opening up a task force so we can actually look at a defined trail between the south and the north. So I'm a big supporter of that idea as well. So basically, we have already done a trial project with the City of Kawartha Lakes in the northern municipality, and it has worked out. Obviously, you're going to have some glitches the odd time, and you are going to have the odd pushback, but really what we're looking to do right now is to create a safe solution. And I think time is now. I think the end game is to get our residents and our visitors the ability to have a safe and legal way of connecting the Victoria Rail Trail to the Ganaraska Forest. And if that partnership is with the Cavan South Monaghan regarding the boundary roads right now, I honestly believe that could be a positive step for us, because right now there's a new trend out there and things are changing dramatically. So right today, I'm looking to see if we can actually adopt and put this into a trial for a year to see how it goes. And I'm actually looking for the support amongst all yous today. Thank you.
So your motion you're putting forward is that the use of off-road vehicles on boundary roads be received, that council supports the request from the Township of Cavan-Monaghan to allow the use of ATVs on designated sections of Journal Road and Glamorgan Road based on a one-year pilot project for the 2021 season, is that? And that if chosen as the final route by the Township of Cavan-Monaghan, that bylaw 219-077 be amended and brought forward to council for adoption? Okay. Seconder, Councillor Seymour Fagan. I won't ask you to speak to it because you very eloquently already have. Do you want to speak to it, Councillor Seymour Fagan?
Yes, so we ran a trial project up in the Somerville area, and it's turned out to work out very well. So I thought, why not try another trial project?
Thank you. Councillor Dunn, you had a question?
Yeah, just a quick question on the wording. So this will last for the entire 2021 season as well?
Yeah, I think the idea is to put it in place for 2021. I mean, this season's almost over.
That's
so
right, yeah, okay, all
the
right.
pilot project would be next year's pilot project.
Perfect, okay.
Councillor Yeo?
Thank you, and speaking in support of the motion, I think it's wonderful that it's finally coming into the south. It might be a baby step, but hopefully one day it'll follow the lead of the northern area. We've adopted this years ago, and it's worked out great. Tourism has taken a big jump forward, and people really enjoy it. And our incidences up there, I don't know if I could count on one hand. Like, there's been so few, so bravo.
Great, thank you. Any further questions, comments? I think you've put forward a good argument, and everybody might not always agree with you, Tracy, but they sure can't accuse you of not doing your homework. So thank you. Do you want to sum up, or?
No, basically, I feel like I've said what I needed to say. We see a high density of new owners of the off-road vehicles in our municipality, in our local wards. I just think it's a direction, and for my way, down my way right now, there's a lot of concerns about getting there safely and legally, and I really believe that this trial is a good opportunity.
Thank you. I'll call the question. All in favor? That passes unanimously. Thank you. So let's go back to thanks, David. You got off the hook there, but we appreciate you hanging out with us. So back to work. 10.11, we'll go back to 10.11, which is the old jail lease agreement with Victoria County Historical Society. That was extracted by Councillor Ashmore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have some issues with this right now, and I'll just go over a few of them. Try and keep it as briefly as possible. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I have some concerns, and I think not just myself, but other people as well. And I appreciate that we got this, this income statement and balance sheet. I didn't know, it would have been nice to have got that before, but anyways, at least we have something there. But the lease rate per year, $1 a year, well, that's a pretty sweet deal, but that's another issue on its own. I just find, okay, right now with the building and the way it is what it is. It's the jail that's been there for over 150 years. It's not conducive for our artifacts to be stored there right now. They're, as we speak, deteriorating, and I really don't see anything that's been done in the last few years, COVID or not COVID, about these exhibits. And the longer we leave the exhibits there, we're exposing them to the elements. We've been talking about a cultural center, and I don't know whether this cultural center will be including a museum or not. So when we start talking about 5 paid positions, I know that's a separate topic in its own, but I mean, it seems to me like in the last 2 months, the definition of maybe I've got a different dictionary, but the definition of a volunteer seems to have changed. So that's something I don't want to get into, but that's what it's morphing into. Here are the facts. Like they applied for a Canadian Museum operating grant, but unfortunately the building didn't qualify. So it kind of shows that unfortunately that building, like I said, it's certainly served its purpose, but and I'm not saying anything about taking it down or anything. I'm not going that anywhere near there. What I'm saying is that it's not appropriate to be housing these artifacts that we have right now. There's a building assessment that is being carried out right now. I'm not sure what the status is of that, but I know that there's an ongoing building assessment. It had started last winter, and I'm not sure whether it's finished or not by York Peterson. Another thing was, quite a few years ago, there was money in the budget for the front entrance on the Victoria Avenue west side, and to this date, that's never been constructed or improved. I mean, I don't know where that money went, but that's another kind of a thing that kind of bothered me. That was never finished. So I just don't feel comfortable in approving this lease right now. So that's sort of where I stand.
So what are you proposing then as a motion? You extract, you just want to receive the report and leave it at that?
Yeah, I think that would be best right now, just to receive.
Just to receive it?
Yep.
Okay, seconder? We can do a follow-up after, but we'll receive it. Councillor Dunn, you'll second that. You've made your point on why you want to just receive it. Do you want to speak to it, or do you want to? Okay. Any other comments on just receiving it? So let's pass that. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. Councillor Dunn, you had a follow-up motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll move the remainder of the recommendation.
Remainder of the recommendation as printed. Seconder, Councillor O'Reilly, go ahead. Do you want to speak to it?
Yeah, if you read what the recommendation is, the city does take on the responsibility of doing necessary upgrades, and in due time, budget permitting, I'm sure that those necessary recommendations will meet all the needs of a museum. It's an ideal spot for a museum. It's central to the town of Lindsay for the local residents. It's on a major traffic route, making it more accessible to visitors. And it in itself is a historical building that, regardless of what we do with it, deserves preservation. So I firmly support the museum where it is.
Thank you. Councillor O'Reilly, you seconded it. Do you want to speak to it?
Well, no, I think Councillor Dunn has pretty well addressed the main issues. I just wondered, would our CAO, would Ron like to speak to this just for a second, if he would?
What do you want him to speak to?
I wanted to speak to the lease in general. I see it's all in front of us, but I just wonder if he has any concerns from a municipal point of view. That's all.
CAO?
Sure, thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So it was mentioned in the deputations, we have a good partnership that I think is solidifying over the last few years in particular. I think the lease agreement that's presented to you is definitely reasonable. It really reflects the conversation we had collectively about a year ago when we did extend on a more temporary basis the lease arrangement, which included or recognized what were the expectations that were reasonable and practical. So this really just piggybacks off of that previous debate. The museum board and staff are responsible for operations. The city, it still is a building in our inventory, so we are taking on the capital improvements and responsibilities, as the one councillor mentioned, over a period of time and through our asset management planning. So I would recommend the lease agreement that's in front of you as printed.
Thank you.
Okay. Just thanks for Ron for that. I just for taking on the capital. I'm arranging. There's going to be major capital to come back to council anyway. So I just thought that if he was comfortable with the capital.
Thank you. Councillor Ashmore, you had a question?
Through you to the CAO. I think the most important question is, our artifacts, are they going to be preserved, or are they being closely monitored in that building? Because the conditions there are not the greatest for these types of exhibits to be stored. And there's been issues in the different levels of the building and how it's affected those artifacts.
CAO?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly would agree that it is a concern not just for us, but for the society. So I think they've done a commendable job sort of maintaining and managing our community artifacts to date. You may recall in previous budget cycles, municipally, we are also ramping up our records and archives sort of programming, and so are working collaboratively with the society to move forward on protection for certain archives, best practices, and how they do things. So yes, there's been some work already. The pandemic has slowed down in the immediate term some of that cataloging, and there's a term that I'll get wrong, but I'll say purging of the collection and managing it. And they are proactively sort of working through that, and including the city as part of that.
Okay.
One more question, please. Just one more, please. So the front entrance, will it be looked after in the next year? I know that, I'm sure it was allocated for to be improved upon and to be renovated, the front entrance, the front door on the west side. Will it ever be more welcoming for people? At the present stage it's in, it's not a very welcoming building for people to come and look at it. Obviously, we have issues right now in the last 5 months, but even before that, there's been issues with at least making it attractive to people to come and spend some time in that building.
I think the people that spent some time in that building weren't really welcome there. But maybe they're trying to put a different one forward now. CAO, do you want to comment on that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, maybe partially, and I know the director's on board as well, if he wants to specify. I don't know the exact timing of that capital project per se or improvement, but I do know it still remains in our capital program. That site is entirely within a multi-year capital improvement program that includes City Hall here as well. So I know, again, the pandemic has delayed particularly planned works for 2020, including dealing with the wall and then some of the periphery issues. But I would suggest that that still remains in the capital program when it's affordable and based on sort of the new changes to our asset management plan. But again, maybe the director can advise if it is in this year's or immediate term plan.
Director Shanks is with us. Welcome, Craig. Can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine. So the question, I don't know if you heard the question, it was just a bit of clarification on some of the capital works on the entrance. If you can, do you have any update on that for us?
Sure. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for the question. Currently, no, there is no budget for that work being proposed in 2021. The previous work that was done was to actually remove the previous entrance because it was an unsafe condition. We did also have a cost estimate done on what it would cost to replace it, but there has never been any funds to actually replace the front entrance. We've worked closely with the society. They have that as well, and they are actively pursuing some external grants to see if they can fast track that project as well. So any work that took place was to replace the unsafe conditions, but there's never been a plan to replace it, and we will continue to work with the society on any external funding, and as been previously mentioned by a few others as well, in any capital requirements moving forward. Part of the new lease agreement actually is the purpose of it to spell out the capital responsibilities. In the past, the previous lease agreement actually put it on the society to do that, and that just wasn't attainable or reasonable. So the new lease agreement truly spells out the responsibility from a capital upgrade standpoint being with the municipality, and I know that the society is strongly in favor of that as well.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask Councillor Dunn to sum up. Maybe you can stay with us because the next report is yours anyway. So go ahead, Councillor Dunn.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Nothing further to say except for my wife spent 20 plus years at that jail and she always felt welcome.
I hope as an employee. I appreciate that. So the motion is as printed. I'll call the question. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. So item 10.1.2 is the Bobcaygeon Beach Park. Just a motion to receive for information. I extracted this. I asked the director to just give us some clarification on the report. Is a substantial list on what we can't do with the reduced or within the budget that was approved. I know that we approved that at the last meeting. That tender has been approved. It's in the works. It's finalized. So this is sort of in addition to that. So I think we're going to pull it up on the screen just for visual. And what I've asked Director Shanks to do is maybe just give us a quick overview on what are we actually building for the original budget. The $6 million that council approved is now the tender that's out there. Instead of focusing on what's being removed, maybe you can just put it in perspective for us, Director, and what are we going to end up with here as far as a beach park?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So what's going to be called up there, if it does get called up, so Appendix A of the report, that showed the conceptual plan pre-public consultation. So as a result of the public consultation, that was reflected, and there was the tender had a different plan attached to it. There wasn't a conceptual plan done for that. We've got it for tender purposes, and we didn't want to spend the money on having that done. But really what it did was take into account a number of the items that came forward through public input, and as well, it did a better delineation of the park between what we'll call the east end of the park and the non-motorized standpoint, and the more western end of the park, which is the motorized. So the previous one, the plan that you're looking at there, which was the conceptual one, all of the motorized and non-motorized boat use was in the same area. After the public consultation, like I say, everything was moved more to the east end on the non-motorized. So as a result, what is happening, what was planned for, was near the beach. You had the snack bar area, the concession stand was completely being redone with new washrooms and playground units on either end of that. There was going to be a non-motorized docking area for canoes, kayaks, as well as a hut to store rental style of those kind of amenities, so that the space could be programmed. You were going to have an accessible mat leading from the beach into the water area, and then there would be some significant boat docking just off of that point, leading towards the open cove area. And then within the cove area, there'd be a walkway out to the point. And then within the cove area, there'd be some further boat docking, as well as boardwalks that would allow for easy access into the boats in that area. And the boat launch itself is going to be turned into a double wide boat launch. And then on the further west end of the park, you're getting significant parking space, as well. There was a planned second washroom facility and an amphitheater. So as a result of the tender, so we put in some provisional items to the tune of about $650,000 that were immediately not being awarded because the funding that was allocated just didn't achieve it. What that was the rental hut for the non-vehicle water toys, some of the sunshades, as well as the accessible mats at the beach area, and some artificial turf along the two playgrounds, as well as around the concession stand area, which is going to have overhangs and act as a shade space and for people to enjoy their meals. So that was removed from the budget. And then to further get down to the allocated budget, we had to remove some further items. So there's about 25% less planting within the plan. The docks have been reduced by about 20% in docking. As well, the second washroom facility has been removed, and the amphitheater has been removed, and the second playground structure has been removed. That will allow us to come within the allocated budget for it. It's still going to be a very, very nice green space park for the residents as well as visitors to use. It is one of the focal point beaches within the city. It's a significant investment that the city is making into our parks across the city, and it's something that the city and its residents and tourists will be able to enjoy. What we're also doing is putting in some of the infrastructure to be able to service future add-ons to the property. So whether there's an amphitheater that can be added in the future through some community fundraising, through some external grants that the city might be able to achieve, or just through future budgeting that the city does. Both the amphitheater and the second washroom building are something that the infrastructure is going to be put into the ground so that they can be added to in the future without having to rip everything up. The docks are built in such a way that you can add docks to them as well. So there is the capability of adding some amenities to the park, whether it's 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road, to further enhance it for our residents and tourists. One other quick item to note Interpretive signage also was planned for both the entrances in the east and west end of the parks. That's been removed as well. That was a provisional item. So that won't be there. And one other quick note is we are still negotiating with the company to be awarded because as we've reduced the scope of the project, that will increase some of the other works that they're planning to do. So there will still be a need for some further removals based on the increases that some of their other amenities that they're going to add to it or that included in the tender to cover. So there will be some further reductions, but we're just in the talks with them right now to cover that off. So hopefully that gives a high level overview of what the park will look like moving forward and what's been removed. But the beach will still be there, but there'll be an enhanced playground, enhanced concession stand, enhanced walkways, enhanced parking, enhanced docking, enhanced boat launch, all still within the proposed plan that we plan to award the tender.
Great. So based on the discussion with the public and from the consultations and just from your work on this, like what would you, and I don't mean now, I mean it's done for now, the tender's out, but what would you see as the priority items moving forward if council choose in future budgets to continue to work on this park? What would you see as maybe the top 2 or 3 things that should be put back into the park at some point? That's more just a curious question than anything else.
To you, Mr. Mayor, to all of council, I believe through what we've heard through the public consultation, the development of the west end of the park, which is really going to be open green space right now, was something that they were very interested in. So that was going to be where the amphitheater went to allow for some other style of programming, some public concerts to take place. That was a high input item from what the public wanted. And the purpose of the second washroom down at that end would obviously be to allow for that space to be used more and provide that amenity so that people didn't have to walk all the way down to the beach end to use washrooms in the future. So I think the development of the west end through an amphitheater and second washroom, docks are obviously a big ticket, a big wish list. And while we're putting in a significant number of docks, adding to those docks in the future would be the other part. So probably those 3 items would be the next 3 biggest. And I do know that staff are talking with various community associations out there about some fundraising, specifically an amphitheater kind of thing, and can the public fund that? So again, there is some opportunities to be able to add to it, and it might be done not necessarily at the cost of the municipality and the taxpayer. It might be through community fundraising efforts.
And my last question, is it your intent as these community groups come forward and these different proposals with staff that you'll bring any further proposals through to council at budget time if there's any top-up needed or any proposals coming forward, and we just sort of continue on that path to grow this park?
Again, to you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. We will 100% be bringing back to council on any future enhancements, regardless of how it's being funded. And I would also suggest to you that staff will be bringing forward in future years, as the budget allows, requests through regular capital budgets to do further enhancements to this park as well. We understand the financial limitations that are with the city both this year and next year due to COVID-19 and what that has done to us, but it will still be on our radar to bring forward to council for future enhancements.
That's great, thank you. So the report is that the beach park be received. Can I get a motion for that? Councillor Yeo and Seymour Fagan? Yes? Any further questions on Councillor Seymour Fagan? Go ahead.
Yes, I have a few questions because this is what the public saw, but we didn't go out for a tender for everything in it. I don't know why we didn't, and why didn't we do an RFP if this is what we're going to do, come back and ask for another $2 million to actually finish the park.
Director?
Agree, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure I quite understand the question. The tender actually included all of the input from the public consultation. So again, that conceptual plan that you see was the pre-one. What went out to tender was the next step, which included the amphitheater. It included the increased boat docking. It included the second washroom, the second playground. All of those things were included in that. So everything that came out of the public consultation was in fact within the tender. And that's why the allocated funds weren't enough to cover it all, and that's why some of the items were in fact listed as provisional, because there was certainly an anticipation that the funding wouldn't be there.
Okay, I'm on the Parks Board, and I didn't know any of this either. So why don't we do an RFP then?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, a tender proposal for a complete park enhancement is the standard protocol for what we go. An RFP would have, to be quite honest with you, too many items that are optional, changes that take place. While there is some significant changes here, and it's understood, basically though, nothing would have to be the same through an RFP proposal. We knew what we were requesting, and when you know what you want to request, you're putting it out as a tender, so people are bidding on those exact items rather than coming forward with whatever they wanted to put in a potential RFP. So this was the best solution for going out to getting a contract awarded for this, with getting the best cost tenders, as well as being able to compare tenders apples to apples as compared to apples to oranges.
Okay, so one of the things you say you're taking out is sand. Is there a reason why we're not going to have sand at the beach park, and also the shades, because they need the shades? We've cut down the trees. The beach is not looking very good right now. I've had many, many complaints from the community. Everything from the fountain not being put in to the buoys not being put in, and the trees going down. So now we're having less soft plantings. We're also having no shade for the beach. So I thought that when you came forward with a price for a park, it would have included everything. So now we're having a lot of the stuff taken out. So it's going to be very difficult for the public to understand this as well, because this is what they were told they were getting.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the water buoys and the water fountain really have nothing to do with this. They weren't put in due to COVID because of the lack of resources and the need to cut back on some services to be able to maintain within both the staffing resources and the budget resources that we have. So it's got nothing to do with this tender. From a sand perspective, the beach is not being removed of sand. There was going to be some sand added to the very back end of the beach. So on what we call the very southwest tip of the beach, there was going to be some added sand there. It's not a lot of sand, but it was something that could be removed from the budget to allow us to follow council direction and come in at the allocated budget that we had. Again, what was proposed, the original conceptual plan that you see as Appendix A, if that was the tender that went out, all of those items actually came in within the budget. The things that we've had to remove, or the things that were provisional items, were the things that were added to it as a result of the community input. And there's still hopefully a potential to add to that in the future. You will recall that when this budget was approved, we're going back a number of years because it was a 3-year project. So the public input portion of it added to what the budget request was. Certainly it was staff's hope that we would go out with the tender and see what we could get to meet with the community input. Some of those things are still added, such as moving the boat docking for the motorized boat docks to the other side. So there's a number of things, some of the boardwalks that are still going on, some of the parking that was requested, some of those items are still there. So much of the community input is in fact still addressed. Some of the other community input that can't happen right now based on the allocated budget the city has, and that's why we're putting in the infrastructure so that they can be added to in the future.
Okay, thank you. I understand that, but this picture here, is this what the park is going to look like? Because you said that this was before the community input, and then this is what came out to tender. Is this what it's going to look like? And are all those amenities that are in this photo that we have up in front of us, is this what the beach park is going to look like now? No.
Through you, Mr. Aaron, no. Again, that was the pre-public input conceptual plan. So that is not what it is going to look like. It's going to, obviously the shape of the park is there, the beach is still in that area, but no, the playground, the concession stand, the walkways, the parking, all of those things are different. So again, that plan was changed and the tender was released based on the community public input session that took place. And then as a result of that tender closing, some of those items were within the tender as provisional. They're not being added because the funds aren't there. And then some of the other items need to be removed to allow us to meet with that allocated budget. But no, that plan that you're seeing right now, it was really there as part of this report as a guide and a framework to see where the conceptual plan started. So it will have some of that look from a shape standpoint, from where the beach is, but it's certainly not what the final look will be.
Okay, I'm just, like, I am on the Parks Board. I didn't know about how things were going to change. Council didn't know. All that we knew is that, we were asked for more money to actually have the park finished. So now the park is going to be not what people expected. And, frankly, I'm disappointed that it's come to this. And, I think that we need to be aware of things as they go on. I think it's only fair, especially such a huge project. So that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Elmsley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Director, for your report. Just a couple of questions. With the docking that's there, are we anticipating revenue from that docking?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, no, that's a day use docking only. There would be no overnight docking. So currently right now, there is no plans for any revenue generation associated with the docks at that property.
Do we have a way of stopping people from docking there at night?
Through the mayor to you, councillor, that would be through some bylaw enforcement or through police enforcement that would be required. There will be signs erected, and we will deal with it very similarly to how we deal with it with other properties where there are docks across the city.
Thank you. One of the things that you say in the report that perhaps you could clarify a little bit, it says we removed the contingency from 10% to 5%. Can you tell me what the implication of that is, and in terms of actual dollars, how much that would be?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. So standard contingency on construction projects is 10%, understanding that we didn't have the allocated funds to do the overall project. We worked with the landscape planners to try to find a way to still be able to do as much of the park work as possible. So not take out some amenities from the park. So one of the concepts there was to drop the contingency budget from 10 to 5%. So on a $6 million project, so the award for this one is about 5.3 million. So 10% was a budget of roughly 530,000. We've cut it in half. So you're looking at about $265,000 in contingency. So the hope is that the plan, when we award and can start to construct, goes relatively smoothly, and we don't run into any issues where costs might need to be or are coming in a little bit higher than what was proposed. So it's a bit of a cross our fingers and hope that we've got enough money to cover some items that might have some additional costs added to them as we proceed.
Thank you for that. One other question. If there are questions about individual items and the costs therein, and I know due to our purchasing policy, we don't discuss these costs outside of closed. Can we send questions to yourself or Rod and get answers on why particular things were done and why perhaps alternatives weren't looked at?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, I know staff and community services are more than happy to speak with council and answer any questions they might have. So whether you come to me or to staff in Parks, Recreation and Culture, councillor, absolutely 100%, please feel free to reach out directly.
Thank you. Councillor Ashmore?
Through you to the director. Just wondering why those healthy trees were taken down in the spring instead of prior to construction, because Obviously, people in this summer would have enjoyed the shade from those trees, but what was the decision behind that? Why do it in the spring? Why did that happen?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. So the trees that were removed were the staff that we have are certified arborists, our parks and open space supervisor is certified, landscape planners, the landscape architect company that we have is obviously certified in those areas. So we are not in the habit of removing healthy trees. We will save as many trees as we can throughout. The trees that were removed were some due to the species of the tree, so ash trees, which recommendations are that they be removed. There were some hazard trees that were removed, and then other trees that needed to be removed were due to the drainage and grading and infrastructure that was going to be taking place within that park. So we couldn't build some asphalt parking lots, some of the facilities, buildings that are going into that park without removing some of the trees. So we didn't remove anything that didn't need to be removed. The timing of it was so that once this project was awarded, we didn't need to delay any of the further construction and we're good to go right away. And it was also the availability of some of our staff to be able to do that as well, because much of the removal was done by our arborists. So at that time of the year, they had the time to go out and do some of this, whereas right now they're dealing with a number of issues that take place throughout the course of the summer months. Obviously, just recently we had a tornado up in Kinmount, so the arborists are spending a significant amount of time up in the Kinmount area dealing with some of our properties up there and some of the mess that's been left behind with that. So we wouldn't have them at our disposal if we waited until this time. Also, you wouldn't want them working during the summer months, taking trees down when the beach and the park is open and being used by the public. So we wanted to, again, create that separation and have some of that work prior to the park being closed. So it's understood that it's an inconvenience to park users for this time, as it will be for the beginning of the season next year. And I think that that's something that staff has advised throughout the entire process, that there is going to be some inconveniences during this enhancement of the park and redevelopment of the park, and that the goal will be to get it done so that it becomes that park that the public and residents and visitors to the city of Kawartha Lakes want to enjoy.
Just one more, please. So these trees here, I haven't counted them all, but there's a lot of them there, which is good. But are you proposing to, okay, this sketch here, will this be what will be the final result, this quantity of trees? Or are we clear cutting most of it, and we're going to replant all these trees, or we're going to be keeping some of them? I was at the meeting, but I can't remember seeing that, but forgive me, but I was at the meeting a while ago, but I don't remember that. So these trees, are they going to be replaced, all replaced, or are we going to be saving some of them?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. So again, the plan as Appendix A there was a conceptual plan. That is not the plan, as I've stated. It has changed. There was a very aggressive tree planting plan that was a part of the tender. As a result of meeting the allocated budget that the city has, we've had to reduce some of the replanting that's taking place by to a tune of about 25%. So there is still some trees that are remaining there. They will not be coming down. I believe all the trees that are down, for the most part, the majority of the trees that are coming down are down now. There might be a few that still have to come down during the grading period, but there is going to be a large number of trees to be replanted. So yes, there is a replanting plan. It's just not as aggressive as it was going to be originally due to the allocated funds that are available to us. And again, the benefit of planting trees is that that is something that we can add to over time. So without a doubt, you will see further requests for funding or further tree plantings done through some of the other budgets that we have, or some of the other external grants that are out there from a replanting plan to be able to further enhance the plantings that will take place over Beach Park. It's just some of it will be at a later period of time than during this construction of the redevelopment.
Okay, thank you. So based on the tender that was awarded, can you give us an idea when work's going to start full speed and when you tentatively think it'll wrap up? I know things change based on weather, but can you give us an idea of the timeline?
to you, Mr. Mayor, so the hope was that we would be able to award this tender last council meeting when the decision was made to go based on the allocated funds. That's again created that negotiation period with the construction company to be awarded based on the lessening of the scope. So we're in that negotiation. The goal will be to start with the construction as soon as we have a negotiation, and then do our best to be able to get as much done as possible so that the park can be used by the public to some degree during the 2021 season.
So the plan, just in general, is to start this fall and to be completed by early summer next year. That's the target plan?
To you, Mr. Mayor, that's the target. And I wouldn't say we'll be complete by the summer of 2021. Our goal will be to have as much done so that the park can be used to the public, but there will need to be works going on probably through to the fall of next year.
Thank you. So we have a motion to receive. No further questions. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you, Director. Appreciate you bringing that forward for some clarification. We'll move over to 10.13 as the next item on our agenda, which is the Waste Management, Public Education and Communication Strategy, extracted by Councillor Ashmore.
Thank you. I talked to Mr. Kerr there, and everything's, I'm fine with what it is in here. But we talked about our calendar here, and right now we don't mail them out anymore. They're just picked up in bulk or they're delivered. But the discussion over the Zoom meeting was that we could look at potentially in the budget posting these out like we used to do, so people could be more educated on the changes to the municipal calendar. So I guess maybe my motion would be for consideration in the operating budget for next year that we add this. It's not a very big amount of money, but just for consideration to be added to the.
So the motion as printed, you're okay with the strategy?
Yep.
And then you want to add another that the mailing, how about the mailing out of calendars be brought forward as a decision unit for council for the 2021 budget?
That's fine.
Does that work?
That's fine.
Does that work, CAO? That'll work, okay. You'll move that, you'll second that. Any further discussion? Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Just on that point, I just had a couple calls that, they don't get as often. Not everybody reads the paper, not everybody gets the paper, the updates that were taken recently. So we'll see how it fits in our budget.
Yeah, come forward as a decision unit and we can have some information and decide then. So that makes sense. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. And then our last one is 10.15, the reconstruction of St. Mary's Bridge was extracted by Councillor Richardson. And I will turn it over to you.
Great, and through you, I extracted it just for some clarification. I know we're over budget on this, and I just want to know if it's passed today, if that work is going to be possible to be completed this year. I'm just looking for clarification because every winter we have to close it, then we open it to just one lane in the spring, and then we close it again. And I know Public Works cannot do any more repairs on it, so I'm just looking for some clarification. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anybody engineering on the line that can? Juan, there he is. Welcome, Mr. Rojas, Director of Engineering. Did you hear the question?
I did.
Can you give us an update?
Sure. The tender that closed had a start date of September 1st. So that's why we're bringing it forward to this council meeting. If approved by council, we would issue the commencement order so that they could start by September 1st. And it's anticipated that it will be done prior to the winter season of this year.
Thank you.
I'm good with that, and I would look for support around the table on this.
You'll move the report as printed?
Yes.
Thank you. Second, Councillor Yeo. Any further questions? Go ahead, Councillor Yeo.
Thank you, and through you to, probably not Juan, but somebody you might know. Why on a 75-year project are we hitting our reserves instead of hitting a debenture for the $500,000?
Do we have anybody from Jennifer Stover, Director of Corporate Services? Are you on the line, Jennifer?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, we can hear you. That's fine. Did you hear the question?
I did. So we could go out for a special debenture if that's council's wish. We have sufficient funds in the capital reserve at this point. There's approximately $2.5 million. And so we thought that this was a reasonable solution, but we certainly could do debenture if that's council's wish.
Well, and I understand we're nice and healthy in reserves, and that's what we strive for. And so on a 75-year project, I don't know why we would tap into what we're striving for as far as reserves and our ratios and not do a debenture on this. So I would offer a friendly, actually, to the mover that the balance be actually funded from a special debenture rather than the reserve. If it's friendly, if it's not, so be it.
That the portion over budget be funded from a special debenture as opposed to the contingency reserve? Are you okay with that?
Yes, I'm good
You're
with
okay
that.
with that? And you seconded it, so I assume you're okay with it? Okay. Councillor Dunn, you had a question?
Well, not so much a question as, well, maybe through to the director. My understanding with the reserves is we constantly replenish them from our budget every year. So they're meant to be a fluid reserve to meet these types of issues. And I guess my position is if staff has determined that's the most appropriate way to go, then maybe that's the way we should go, because those reserves or that debenturing room will not be available to us now in the 2021 budget cycle. If we spend it now, spend it now or spend it later, and if staff thinks it's appropriate to spend it now. So I'd like to hear what the director's got to say.
Director Stover, did you hear the question?
I did. So
Okay.
through you, this reserve that we're taking, we actually have two capital reserves. So we have the reserve that we fund through the tax levy every year, and that goes towards maintaining our assets. There's a different sort of a capital contingency reserve. So you'll recall quarterly we bring a report forward where we close capital projects, and any surplus funding from those projects goes into that capital contingency reserve. And it's really intended to deal with projects that go over or under budget. So when it's a project's under budget, it builds the reserve. We have a project that goes over budget, we can pull the money out of that reserve to fund that project. So that was the rationale for why we chose that reserve. We could do a special debenture. It does ultimately impact our ability to debenture other projects, but it's 400 and some thousand. It's not millions of dollars that we're looking for. So I don't think it would have a significant impact on our overall budget room or our ability to debenture projects in 2021. So I'm fine with whichever way council chooses to go on.
So Director, just on that note, if I can you clarify how the original amount of the tender, the $979,400, how was it financed in the budget? Was it through a debenture or was it through the tax levy?
I don't actually have that information in front of me. I can report
I think
back to
Juan,
council
I think
on
Juan
how
knows,
that
our
was done.
Director of Engineering, Jennifer, so I'll flip over to him.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I did look at that, the original funding source with the Finance Department prior to writing this report. So it was funded by three different funding sources. One was a federal gas tax, one was debenture, and then one was a general tax levy or reserve. So those were the three funding sources. The lion's share was a federal gas tax, but it's been maxed out. And through the manager or the Finance Department, we had looked at all three funding sources as a possible option for the overage or a combination thereof. And their recommendation was to fund it 100% through the contingency reserve for the overages.
Thank you. Councillor Yeo, you had a follow-up question?
Yeah, and I've been here a long time, and just when it comes to bridges and buildings and all that stuff, just historically, we've always debentured those projects because they are around so long. And it leaves the reserves available for the emergency funding we might need when something happens, I don't know, like an HVAC system falls through the roof of City Hall. To me, that's what a reserve is for, not for a 75-year bridge. And I'm not looking for a fight. I'll withdraw my second. I just think that historically, that's what we've done, and I don't see any reason to change what we're doing in the past and leave this reserve in a nice, healthy balance.
Thank you. Any further questions? Go ahead.
Just a question, like, does this affect other projects, like other bridges that may be built? Just asking.
It's not going to affect your bridge next year, big guy. Don't worry. We got you covered.
Just asking
You're
for.
trying to sneak that comment in there. We got it there for you. Don't worry
Asking-
about it.
Just asking for.
Well, it's less debenture room, right? We only have we have a debenture ceiling, so there's $463,000 less that we'll be able to debenture next year, but
like
there's more in the reserve, that's
Councillor
right.
Yeo had said, like, these bridges last 75 to 100 years, like, they're a long-term financing project, like.
Nope, I agree. Do you want to sum up, Councillor Richardson? Oh, Councillor O'Reilly has a question, sorry.
Right, just for a second, it looks like either way, we're going to get it done. I'm just kind of, if we have the money in the reserve at this time, it'd be my thought that we take it out of the contingency, the capital contingency reserve, rather than debenture. I'm not against debentures, it's a long-term one, but my preference would be to take it out of the capital reserve because we have it in there now.
Okay,
Thank you.
well, the motion on the floor is that it
Yeah.
come out of the special debenture for the balance, the additional expenditure. If that fails, we can go back to the original motion. Councillor Richardson, do you want to sum up on the amended motion?
Sure, put that in my court. It's good, both good arguments on both parts, but like I said, whatever's easiest at this time, if the director could give us some type of insight, because we're hearing two valid arguments.
I don't think one's easier than the other. We'll use that as your sum up. The motion's on the floor. We'll get it done one way or the other. I'm going to call the question. This is to special debenture on the additional expenditure. All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Motion passes. Thank you, directors. Appreciate your feedback on that. That was our last consent item. We don't have any correspondence, any petitions, other or new business, bylaws. Councillor Seymour Fagan, you have the bylaws. Yes, Councillor Seymour Fagan, you have the bylaws. See, that's why you're not deputy mayor anymore. Yes, we're extracting two. Councillor Seymour Fagan, 312 and 315. Now, just for my clarity, the one do we have to make any, we don't have to make an amendment to 312, right? We didn't change that? But we didn't change the report recommendation at planning?
No, but I believe the actual bylaw was changed.
They changed it already.
From what we.
Okay, so we didn't change it from what the new change was. So 312 and 315 are extracted. Are there any other extractions from bylaws? Seeing none, Councillor Seymour Fagan, go ahead. You better get Councillor Helmsley to second it so his feelings aren't hurt. Thank you. All in favor? That's passed. 312 was the extracted one, so we need a bylaw to amend the Township of Verulamium zoning bylaw number 6-87 to rezone land within the city of Kawartha Lakes, 36 Walkers Road. That bylaw be read a first, second, and third time, passed, numbered, signed, and the corporate seal attached. Councillor Yeo, you'll move that. Councillor O'Reilly, any comments? All in favor? That's passed. 1315 is a bylaw to amend the Village of Fenelon Falls zoning bylaw number 89-25 and the Township of Fenelon zoning bylaw number 12-95 to rezone land within the city of Kawartha Lakes, 126 Lindsay Street to 130 Lindsay Street and 573 Kawartha Lakes Road 121. That bylaw be read a first, second, and third time, passed, numbered, signed, and the corporate seal attached. Councillor Helmsley will move that. Seconded by Councillor Vail. All in favor? That's passed. We don't have any notice of motion. We are going to go into closed session, so I'll ask for adoption of the closed session agenda, please. Councillor Yeo and Dunn, all in favor? That's passed. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest in closed session items? Seeing none, can I get a motion to move into closed? Councillor Yeo and Vale, all in favor? That's passed. We'll take 5 minutes to let them disconnect the audio and the video and close the doors, and we'll get into closed. Are we good to go? Okay, so we're now back and open, and we have a couple of statements to make out of close. Madam Clerk?
So the matters coming out of into open session from closed, item 15.3.1, the closed session confidential minutes of the July 28th regular council meeting were approved. Item 15.3.2, that details of an interested party's proposal for the direction and sale of the subject property was provided to council. Item 15.3.3, the city solicitor provided information pertaining to the recent discovery of an Aboriginal burial site and obtained instruction pertaining to the same. And that the CAO, Ron Taylor, provided council an update on 2 separate personnel matters. No motions required.
Thank you. Confirming bylaw, Councillor O'Reilly, or Councillor Elmsley?
Well, that's why I wondered if you wanted to change name. See, it says here that a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of a regular council meeting held Thursday, August 20th, 2020, be read a first, second, third time, passed, numbered, signed, and the corporate seal attached. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Dunn.
Thank you. All in favor? That's passed. And a motion to adjourn. Councillor Yeo and Seymour Fagan. All in favor? That's passed. We are adjourned. Our next meeting is September 1st, a committee of the whole meeting here. Thank you.